Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Those who came to Harrenhal for the prize money had already packed up and left, but those who remained still made enough noise for Jon to hear the closing night feast all the way in the heart of the Godswood. Distant and muffled, the drum beat drifted into the Northmen's sacred space, with the sound of voices raised in a raucous song he did not recognize. Meanwhile, he was out in the dark and the cold, shivering in borrowed furs and scowling into the river. Only the sound of Bran's footsteps drew his attention to the back to the weirwood. It was still so strange to see his brother walking that it made him smile despite all else that was imploding around him. It had rained all evening, and the earth was soft and springy beneath his feet as he joined his brother at the tree. "Sansa's close by, so I don't have long," Bran explained. "But next time we meet, I'll bring her with me." "You can do that?" he asked. Bran seemed certain. "We are all wargs," and I opened Sansa's third eye again. "She knows there's more to her dreams now. When she arrives, I'll have them prepare the paste for her. As soon as she has that, she can come with me. Just remember, no one here but you will be able to see her." Paste? There was still so much Jon didn't understand. Now Bran's expression darkened, and he shook his head. "It's best you don't know. What you should know is that Uncle Benjen is with her." "Benjen's alive?" he gasped, all worries about strange pastes gone in an instant. "Are you sure it's him?" "It's him. I saw him through the raven," Bran confirmed. Jon felt almost weak-kneed with relief. It was the first piece of good news he had had in a long time. "What's happening here? I've been so busy guiding Sansa that I haven't been able to come back to you." Before he could answer, Jon drew a deep breath as he marshaled his wits. He began with the bet he won by using his foreknowledge, Lyanna's being crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty, and Princess Akia leaving Rhaegar and returning to King's Landing. Their marriage as good as dissolved. Lyanna's public humiliation they already knew about, but the dissolution of the royal marriage was new to them both. But Bran had other concerns. "If you keep using your knowledge to try and circumvent history, they're going to know there's something odd about you," he cautioned. "You cannot explain away why you know so much about the future, and you were already sailing close to the wind just by telling Aunt Lyanna that Rhaegar is a rapist." Jon sighed impatiently. "Brittany, do you know how hard it was for me when Father and Robb were murdered, when Winterfell was taken, and I thought you and Rickon were dead? I was stuck at Castle Black, unable to do anything. Here, I might be able to do something, and if I can, I will. Neither you nor some three-eyed bird are going to convince me otherwise." He paused for breath, but before Bran could get a word in edgeways, he continued, "And you said it yourself, I am here for a purpose. I cannot believe that that purpose is to do nothing more than passively observe, as our family are butchered all over again. What's the point? We know what happened here. We already know how this story ends. So there must be something more to this, Bran. There has to be. Especially now, when Sansa needs me. When the North needs me." As he grew more heated, Bran took him by the shoulders to calm him. "I agree with you. I swear I do. All I'm asking is that you don't go charging in and revealing the future to everyone and attempting to rewrite history. Not until we know more. Please, Jon." Frustrated, he pulled away and took a moment to compose himself again. Lashing out at Bran wasn't helping him, and it certainly wasn't helping reveal the purpose of his being stuck in the past. He turned back toward the river that nourished the Godswood, torn between the past and the present. Meanwhile, Bran was keeping his distance. "There is something I've learned," said Bran. "Sardava Seaworth is tearing apart Castle Black looking for a Valyrian steel sword you now own. I was watching through Mormont's old raven." Instinctively, Jon's hand found its way to Longclaw's hilt, where it was still sheathed at his hip. He flexed his hand around it for comfort, then drew the blade to show Bran, the Valyrian steel soaked in the dappled moonlight, making it shimmer like rippled glass. "It's here," he said, holding it up for him to see. "It came with me. Even the clothes I was wearing came with me." The clothes were little more than a loincloth to preserve his modesty. The memory made him flush in the face. Meanwhile, Bran sharply focused on the sword. "Physical objects can be transferred through time barriers," Bran observed, answering Jon's curiosity. "Give me something from this time and I'll see if I can bring it back to ours." Jon thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a single rose bloom. This was from Lyanna Laurel before she bashed Rhaegar over the head with it. I picked one out to press and dry for her, as a keepsake, but I don't think she wants it anymore. Bran stifled a laugh as he took the flower. Good, now let's see what happens when I bring it into our time. He slipped the rose into his pocket, and they prepared to go their separate ways again. But before he left, Bran called him back. Where did you get the information about Elia and Rhaegar's marriage? Ashardane, Jon replied. We spoke just before I left the feast. She's Yaxley's lady-in-waiting, so she's bound to know. Just so you know, I told her to get Ia and her children straight to Dorne as soon as possible, and not come back for any reason. Even from a distance, Jon could see Bran's eye roll. You really shouldn't. But Jon turned his back on the lecture and strode out of the godswood. Besides, he didn't for 1 minute think Elia would listen, let alone act on it. Thus far, history had done a good job of thwarting him. A glimmer of glazed ivory caught the prince's eye. Yaxlia's hair grip, sitting on the nightstand and reflecting the candlelight. Dejectedly, he picked it up and absent-mindedly pulled out a long strand of brown hair still tangled between the teeth. She must not have realized it was still there when she left for King's Landing. The pillow on the bed still out of shape from where she had lain her head the night before, and the twisted sheets still bore the creases from her legs. The essence of her was everywhere he looked. The smell of her still lingered in the air. Perched on the edge of the bed they had shared, he looked toward the door and wondered if she might walk back through it. But the door stayed closed and no footsteps sounded from the hallway beyond. Rhaegar was alone with only the distant sounds of the closing night feast to keep him company. His father had summoned him, a summons he ignored, and the consequences be damned. Aerys would want to haul him over the coals because of the Dornish alliance, while all he needed was space and time to absorb the impact of this blow. A shimmer of guilt ran the length of his body as he realized it was the children he couldn't bear to lose, rather than her. Aerys gone had barely drawn his first breath, and Rosie's had been the light of his life since the moment her big brown eyes had met his, but there had to be one more. The dragon has 3 heads, and he needed his Visinia. These thoughts reminded him of the special pack beneath the bed, where his most prized possession was being kept. He leaned down from the edge of his bed to check on it, before getting distracted by Lyanna's discarded laurel. Reaching down to gather it up again, he looked at the crushed petals with sadness in his eyes as he remembered how the story went. The single blue rose left on the girl's pillow after she had been stolen away into the night, enraging the Lord of Winterfell. But that was just an old story the Starks told their children, and he was not an abductor. She had to come willingly. He had to make her see. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. Your Grace, it is I, Brandon of House Stark. In a belated act of discretion, he chucked the rose laurel under the bed where Lord Stark would not see it. Only then did he answer the door himself. Lord Stark, be welcome. Can I get you anything? Brandon Stark was a towering man and broad-shouldered with it, a fierce fighter, or so they said. But his rugged exterior belied the charming nature he deployed on the women of the realm with a devastating ease. Ashardane was the latest notch on the Northman's bedpost. Poor Caitlin Tully. A white wine wouldn't go amiss, Your Grace, Brandon replied. His dark gray eyes roved over the chambers he found himself in. The prince could not tell whether he was impressed or not, nor did he much mind meanwhile. Rhaegar summoned a servant to fetch the wine. Wine, he realized. They both needed. When the servant appeared, a small boy dressed in a shabby livery that Rhaegar had not seen before, he pulled out seats for them both at a window table and fetched fresh candles. Then he decanted the wine. Rhaegar watched him, curiously, then slid a gold dragon over to him. Buy yourself some sweets. The advice made the boy's hands tremble, sloshing the wine over the edge of the glass. Although Rosier didn't mind. Anyone else would have given him a slap for that, especially if he had been a real servant. That was generous, Brandon remarked once the boy was gone. More generous than Varys, I hope, replied Rhaegar. Comprehension dawned on Lord Stark's face. Now I understand. Do you think he's gone running to the nearest confectioner's? Or is he loitering around somewhere in hope of more rewarding sweets? It was a good question. Varys had them well trained, and they never went anywhere alone. Rhaegar got up and checked the passageway outside. Then the servant's door. Finding it empty, he returned to Brandon in the antechamber and shut the door securely behind him. He even opened the window to make sure no children had shimmied up the wall on grappling hooks. Needless to say, the coast was clear. Had this been the Red Keep, he would be able to hear them scratching around like rats in the wall cavities. Try as he might, he thus far utterly failed to work out how this urchin's managed to get in everywhere. "You're making me even more nervous," Brandon laughed, sipping at his wine. He had come from the feast and was still hot and flushed in the face. "Who is this Varys? It sounds like he knew about my sister before even she knew it herself." Rosier laughed dryly. "That really wouldn't surprise me, my lord. He's a eunuch from across the narrow sea. I don't know where exactly. No one does. That's the thing. He knows everything about everyone, but no one knows anything about him. So, that little display with my sister this afternoon." Brandon's expression hardened as he met his gaze. "Was that to throw Varys off the scent? Send your father into such a rage with you that he forgets the Knight of the Laughing Tree." "What? Do you know who the Knight of the Laughing Tree is?" he asked, suspecting he fully did. Brandon nodded. "Ben told me in the end. I refused him permission to join the Night's Watch, and he became near hysterical. He's a boy, and can't be expected to harbor secrets like that. But tell me, Your Grace, is this really the only way to keep Ben safe, by having him shipped off to the Watch? And what of Lyanna? I tell you, if our father finds out, then King Aerys will be the least of her worries, and there are no sisterhoods to keep her safe from the endlessly grasping tentacles of Varys the Spy Master. No one at all can touch Benjen if he's in the Watch, Rhaegar reminded him. Besides, we need to reinforce the Night's Watch in whichever way we can. Remember that, my lord, when you come into your inheritance, there is more than one war coming. A frown creased Brandon's heavy brow, but he sipped his wine again and pushed the issue of Lyanna. And my sister? I cannot have any harm befall her, regardless of how it seems. I love her with all my heart. Of course, and I was going to send her to Dragonstone, but that's no longer an option, he confessed. My wife has left me. I want her and our children to live there from now on. They'll be safe there, and, if need be, they have easy access to the free cities. I just hope Axlier will listen to reason. The other man's expression softened. I'm sorry for your troubles. Soon Lord Robert is returning to the Eyrie with my brother. They'll both be safe there. Perhaps Storm's End is a viable hideaway. Rosier didn't like the sound of it, not with the other Baratheons, Stannis and Renly, still there. True, one was a child, but Stannis was a cold and frosty thing. Lyanna could not come and go as she pleased with him watching over her. Also, despite his distaste of Robert, he may need the Stormlord to raise his banners at a moment's notice. As he explained, Brandon topped up their glasses himself. I must say, Your Grace, I am not in the least bit comfortable with this idea of Lyanna roaming the realm like a hunted animal, he confessed. I must know where she is at all times, how to get in touch with her, and how to reach her in an emergency. Then an idea struck him. What about that Cranagman she saved? Lord Reed, surely he will be able to offer her a shelter should she need it. Or even Moat Island for the time being. She will be close to the north with easy access to the south. In the meantime, she could even remain here at Harrenhal, just for the time being. Brandon did not answer immediately. He sipped his wine with a frown on his face, mulling it all over. After what seemed an age, he looked back up at the prince with a look of calculation on his face. Is there really a war coming? Are you really going to rise against your father? He asked. Forgive me, Your Grace. I know things must be extremely difficult. But has it really come to this? The Lannisters have abandoned him, and he's alienating many other noble houses, Rhaegar explained. He's already burned 2 hands of the king for reasons best known to himself. We've tried to keep it quiet, but he's long past caring who knows of his madness. He's also got pyromancers working on making wildfire, which he plans to rig up all over the city. A precaution against rebellion. If anyone steps out of line, he'll blow the whole place. Whatever the cost, he must be stopped. Maybe he would be remembered as a kinslayer, but rather a kinslayer than letting millions die in a sea of wildfire. Once he was king, Varys would be first on the chopping block for the fear and madness he instilled in Aerys. Brandon drained his glass and placed it back on the table between them. When Rhaegar went to refill it, he placed his hand over it to stop him. Their eyes met, Brandon's glittering menacingly as he spoke. I am trusting you, on your honor as a prince of this realm, with the safety of my beloved sister. Should anything happen to her, I will hold you responsible. Rhaegar swallowed, finding his throat dry and constricted. I will give my life for her, gladly. Why? Because I love her, the prince answered without hesitation. I pray your father will raise his banners for us when the time comes. He knew Brandon was far from convinced, but so far he had not refused permission. Even if he hadn't exactly granted it either, now he rose to his feet and stood behind his vacant chair as he shrugged on his furs, ready to leave. If I suspect that she has come to harm, we will not hesitate to raise our banners against you, he warned, eyes narrowed. Rhaegar sighed. I've already confessed my love for her. Now you should be aware that the Danes also feel equally protective over their womenfolk. Remember that, my lord, in your future dealings with Lady Ashara. Whatever furious retort Brandon had, he bit it back and simmered silently. It was a moment of madness. You dishonored her, Rhaegar cut in. Ser Barristan Selmy witnessed it, and your own brother, who comforted her afterwards. So don't think this won't come back to haunt you. Now go, and remember who Ashara's brother is. I didn't force her. No one said you did. We said you dishonored her, the prince corrected. There is a difference. However, Brandon was already halfway to the door, and Rhaegar soon found himself alone again. Muffled thumps and thuds emanated from behind Lyanna's closed door. Before knocking, Jon paused to listen. It sounded like she was rearranging the whole room, instead of just packing up her belongings. Suddenly apprehensive, he knocked anyway and waited for the all-clear to step inside. Inside, all fell silent, and footsteps approached the door, and it opened, revealing a tear-stained face. Lyanna hastily composed herself when she saw him standing there. Come in, she beckoned, voice hoarse. The room was in disarray, reminding him strongly of the day Arya packed to leave Winterfell. The last time he had seen her, when he gifted Needle to her. I looked for you at the feast, he said. You didn't seriously think I could show my face there, after what happened, she replied, dryly. No, I've been here all day and getting ready to leave. I decided I'm going home to Winterfell and the prince be damned. She avoided his eye and busied herself with tidying up the mess. Silk stockings of mismatched colors were scattered around the floor and dying flowers sat wilting in vases. One case was completely overstuffed while another sat forgotten and neglected beneath the bed. In an effort to help, Jon knelt down and retrieved. She thanked him, still not meeting his gaze. She flung it open and dumped an armful of clothes inside without folding a single garment. Then she stopped and exhaled a breath she'd held. You knew, she said, eyes still on the messy bundle of clothes. You knew Rhaegar would win, and you knew he was going to crown me in front of all those people. Even though she wasn't looking, Jon nodded. I suspected. No, she whipped around and caught his eye at last. You knew, you spoke in certainty. I told you I overheard his people talking about it, he lied, fluidly. Those roses only grow in the north, so he had to order that laurel especially for you. That was what got tongues wagging, I think. Lyanna looked momentarily startled. Gods, I hadn't even thought of that. He really did have this planned out in advance. We've been here for a fortnight. That's not long for a consignment of winter roses to be brought from the north, is it? Unless they sailed, it takes more than 2 weeks just to pass the neck. Now that she was elaborating on his lie, he began considering it himself. She was right, unless the prince just happened to have a bunch of those roses just handily sitting around somewhere. Coincidental, but not impossible, he supposed. Come and sit down with me, he implored her. It's late, and we're not leaving until morning. You will have time finished before we leave. Clearly fed up with the onerous task, she didn't take much persuading. They were soon sat before the open fire, warming themselves and sipping spiced wine a servant brought for them. The youth of the servant struck Jon. He was barely a child. How do you feel about Rhaegar now? He asked, as soon as they were alone again. Lyanna was thoughtful for a moment, angry, furious, in fact, but her sentence broke off. And he prompted, when she failed to pick up the thread. Instead of answering, she fixed him with a steely look from over the rim of her goblet as she drank deeply. You said he was a rapist and an abductor, she continued. What made you say that? To his dismay, she was back on the subject of his foreknowledge. Rumors, the same kind of rumors you heard about the laurel and of Ser Barristan throwing the joust for him. No, my lady, Jon replied, shaking his head. I honestly think I was woefully misinformed. He just isn't like that. You don't think he would. He couldn't say why, exactly, but everything he had seen of Rhaegar, everything he now knew, it all felt wrong. As a bastard, he had learned from a young age to observe people, to read their body language, and pick up on silent cues. He knew how to read people and assess. Sometimes he found himself more curious about the prince than he did his own father, but he had to admit It had been Lyanna who drew him the most. Out of all them, he gravitated toward her with a force he had no control over. Poor Prince Rhaegar seemed afflicted with the same compulsions, and she was sweetly oblivious to it all. Now Lyanna just looked sad. It's my father I worry for. My shame is his. He's going to be in a rage over what happened, and even if I really did want to go straight back to Winterfell, I cannot. I was fooling myself thinking I could go back so soon after such a show. But it wasn't your fault, Jon protested. Surely Lord Rickard would see that. She sighed wistfully. You know how our lordly fathers work, Jon. Privately, they know that they can acknowledge that to themselves. But the world is going to see him accepting his husband's stealing whore of a daughter back into his home, no questions asked. That would be unacceptable to him, and to the realm as a whole. Laughing dryly, she added, Do you think Rhaegar knew that? He might even have done it on purpose, knowing I would be in such trouble as to need to lie low. I don't think he thought that, Jon stated. I don't think he thought at all. More's the pity. Did he give you no clue about what he was planning? Did he not say anything during your meetings? Lyanna shook her head. We talked about many things, but not that. He showed me his dragon egg, and I told him about that silly story the small folk of Winterfell always tell. That there's a dragon living deep inside the crypts of Winterfell. I thought it would amuse him. Jon had heard that story too. He and Rob had even gone looking for the dragon, only to find their path blocked by fallen masonry about 6 floors underground. Did it not amuse him? Lyanna looked distant as she recalled the conversation. He took it really seriously. I tried to tell him it's just a story told to children to scare them into behaving. Believe me, Benjen and I tried looking for it. No sign? He asked. Well, we didn't get very far, she confessed, sounding more than a little disappointed. We couldn't get past the fallen masonry, and our father expressly forbid any attempt at an excavation. Jon had to stop himself from laughing. It seemed every generation of Stark children had gone in search of the fabled dragon, only to be thwarted by the same fallen masonry. Did you say Rhaegar has a dragon egg? He asked. One of those would come in useful against the White Walkers, he admitted. Also, even at Castle Black, there had been rumors of a Targaryen princess hatching 3 of them, rumors brought to them by sailors who sailed the known world. Lyanna sighed, happily this time. You should see it, Jon. It's beautiful. Blue and silver and warm to hold. He swears it's alive, but all I can feel is the heat. Jon smiled. Is he trying to hatch it? Most of his family die terrible deaths in the attempt. Not him, but he thinks his children will, she replied. It's such an odd thing. He grows very heated when he talks about this stuff. But he's convinced his son, Aegon, is the prince that was promised, and that he will hatch the dragon. The prince that was promised? He asked curiously. Azor Ahai, as he's known to the likes of you and I, she clarified. Everyone has a different name for him. But you know the story, don't you? That this man fights the others and drives them back into the land of always winter in the far north. Rhaegar has it in his head that this war will one day, soon, be fought again. Jon didn't know what his face was doing, but his heart was suddenly racing again, and Lyanna looked at him, concern suddenly etched in her face. Jon, what's the matter? She asked. You've suddenly gone all pale and interesting on me. The war against the others, he murmured. What does the prince know? Baffled by his sudden change, Lyanna shrugged. I was barely listening. It's such nonsense. Stuff he read in some book written by a long-dead magician. He didn't know about the prince that was promised. But the war Rosier clearly feared really was happening. And he, Jon, was caught in the middle of it. He had seen the Night's King. He had seen the dead rise and march against the living. Memories of Hardhome made his skin crawl and his blood run cold. I must speak with the prince, he said, as a matter of urgency. What? Lyanna spluttered. Jon, it's just speculation. It's not, he cut in. Believe me, it's not. They had to know, now. He knew that. He didn't know what he would say to make them believe him. But he had to think of something. And quickly, Fran released his grip on the roots of the weirwood tree. His body felt like it had been squeezed off a tight tube and spat out at the other end. His breath was short and labored, while he composed himself and got his bearings back. The children had gone and seemingly taken Meera and Hodor with them. Only the 3-eyed raven remained, impassive, dozing up in his seat among the roots and tendrils of time. He remembered the bloom Jon had given him and reached into the pocket of his jacket. It was still there, blue and fragrant. In palm of his open hand, it filled the air around him with sweetness. Then, even as he watched, the petals withered, turned black, and shriveled away to dust as it aged almost 20 years in the space of a few seconds. Soon there was nothing left as the petals turned to dust and blew away on the draft. That was curious, he thought to himself, for Jon did not shrivel back into nothingness when he went back in time. Before he could dwell too long on the conundrum, a commotion broke out close to the door. He heard Hodor's voice calling out excitedly, "Hodor, Hodor, Hodor," a girl cried, echoing sobs, and it definitely wasn't Meera. Running footsteps charged down the passageway, and he knew who it was. "Sansa," he cried out, furious at his broken body and inability to get up and throw his arms around her. "Sansa, I'm in here," as if she knew where in here was. All the same, she spun around the corner and crashed to a halt at the sight of him. He saw all the fear, the grief, and the pain melt away from her face as her gaze locked into his own. Still, she could not believe it was him, as if a spell had been cast. She hesitated. "Sansa," he said, choked with emotion. Without wasting any more time, she swooped down on him, and they held each other so tight neither could breathe properly. She was cold, so cold, from her journey through the frozen wastes beyond their tree. He resolved not to let her go until the warmth returned to her. "Wait!" Lyanna's voice stopped him before he reached the door. "You can't just go barging into the prince's chambers. His guards will have you arrested. Sit down and talk to me first. Then we'll decide what to do next." Jon hesitated, his palms still flat against the double doors as if to push them open. Had he been north of the wall in this state, he'd hang back and calm himself down, before charging in and making fatal mistakes. It was the same now. He had to be in control of himself, so he drew a deep breath and turned to face her. "Maybe you're right," he ceded. "All this business about heroes and princes promised is the stuff of soothsayers and superstition, but the war is real. I know it's real." Lyanna was now looking at him as if he was a pet turned savage, worried that any false move would set him off. To ease her obvious worry, he slowly moved from the door and sat back down in the seat he so recently vacated. The fire was still blazing in the hearth, his spiced wine glowing ruby red in the reflected light. He picked up the glass and sipped at it to help settle his scattering nerves. Although the hour drew late, when silence fell in the room, he could still hear the distant sounds of the closing night feast in the Hall of the Hundred Hearths. "It's hard to explain how I know," he told her. "But I do know." His aunt drew her chair closer to his, so that when she sat back down their knees were almost touching. This close, he could see deep into her dark gray eyes. So gray, they were almost black. Even in the firelight, they were identical to his own, and met his own in quiet understanding. "No matter how hard it is, Prince Rhaegar is going to need to know how you got this knowledge," she explained. Anyone, in fact, isn't going to just take your word for it. But start with me, and I'll back you up. It's better than just barreling in there and blurting it all out, whatever it is. This was far from the first time he had wanted to tell her everything. He'd lain awake on more than one night, framing the conversation perfectly in his head. He thought he knew what he would say, predicted her reactions, and framed responses that were concise and clear. All that went flying out the windows and up the chimney now that the moment seemed to have come. "I've traveled a lot," he began, not entirely untruthfully. "Mostly north of the wall. I've traveled through the Frostfangs, the Skirling Pass, and Hardhome. I fell in love with a wildling girl whose name was Ygritte." He trailed off, wondering why he even mentioned Ygritte. All she did was pick open a wound that had barely healed since her death, and he could feel his eyes burn now, just by raising her ghost. Noticing his distress, Lyanna reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "Is she dead?" Jon nodded. "But I stayed with her and her people. They were the only reason I survived out there. So you see, I know what's out there. I've seen the others with my own two eyes. At Hardhome, I saw them raise the dead and turn them against us. They come from the north and they're migrating south. So if Rhaegar knows something about this war and how to beat the dead armies, I need to know. I need to take it back with me if we're to stand any chance at all." Lyanna's expression was inscrutable as she listened, her head cocked to one side. For a long time after he finished explaining, she remained silent as if mulling it all over. "How come you were with the wildlings?" she asked, eventually. "Because I think I've fathomed out the truth about you, Jon. Tell me honestly. Are you a deserter from the Night's Watch? If so, all this talk of others and dead men rising won't be enough to save you from the penalty for desertion. A sudden chill made him shiver as he remembered the deserter his father killed, not long before he left Winterfell. He had talked of others then, and Jon had barely understood what he meant. And, living up to Lyanna's cautionary words, it had not been enough to save him from justice. The memory of Theon Greyjoy kicking the man's head made his stomach turn in revulsion. "I'm no deserter," he assured her, sotto voce. He tried to think of something else to say that could prove it, but there was nothing. He felt like he was being slowly backed off the edge of a sheer cliff. "Had I been a deserter, do you think I would have talked to that wandering crow who was recruiting here? I even brought Benjen to him and helped him sign up." Lyanna looked visibly relieved. "Forgive me if I offended you, but I remembered finding you with no clothes on. I thought maybe you saw us Starks coming and dumped your black cloaks. That and your story about traveling north of the wall. Well, you can see how it looked." He could indeed, because she was so close to the truth now. And Jon could see by looking at her that she had a lot of unanswered questions and was struggling to join a myriad of dots. "I am a brother of the Night's Watch, but I'm no deserter," he confessed. Lyanna smiled wryly. "So, that story you gave me about your father hunting you down was just another lie. One, it would seem, designed to make me feel sorry for you. I don't know why I still trust you, but I do. Anyone else would have tossed you out the window by now, and I begin to think I'm going soft in the head. But I warn you, Jon, don't take advantage of my bleeding heart. Even I have my limits." The accusation stung, but he could see how his behavior looked. Reddening in the face, he found he could no longer look her in the eye. "The truth is simple, but it makes no sense," he began, voice still low. "That's the only reason I haven't told you." Lyanna sighed in exasperation. "Surely the truth is easier than making up all these fictional families. I mean, you told me about your brothers and sisters. They're real," he cut over her, suddenly. The pain of separation caught him in the chest once more. It wasn't just distance that divided him from them now, but years of pure time. "I wish I could just explain it, but to explain it I'd have to understand it, and I just don't. I don't understand any of this. I don't understand why I'm here, how I got here, or what I'm meant to be doing here." Confronting the reality of his situation made him anxious and jumpy with pent-up frustration. He couldn't help it. All his life he had been able to apply logic or reason to any situation. If something happened, he could see it was a consequence of a separate event. But this was arbitrary and senseless, and it defied logic. Meanwhile, his aunt was looking back at him without a trace of comprehension in her eyes. "When you were attacked, were you hit on the head?" she asked, all sympathy once more. Amnesia is common enough. Her sympathy grated on his nerves and turned his mood waspish. "I remember perfectly. I remember it all. Every face of every man who stabbed me. Like I said, I couldn't tell you what happened, because I don't understand it myself." He paused for breath, unsheathed Longclaw, and placed it on her knees. "That sword was a gift from the old Lord Commander to me. The new Lord Commander. I told you about the others. Well, I wanted to make a deal with the wildlings, so we would all fight against the others together. Wildlings and brothers alike, all united against the armies of the dead." "Jon, this makes no sense," she cut in. A frown darkened her face. "We would have heard. The Lord Commander is Quargel. He's alive." "I know," he cut her off, unable to disguise his anger and frustration. "But listen to what I'm telling you." All right, she retorted, holding her hands up in a placatory manner. "Take your time." Before continuing, Jon drained the last of his spiced wine. He was growing angry and confused, helping no one, and scaring his poor aunt. None of this was her fault, and it certainly wasn't her fault that he made no sense. "The pact between the Night's Watch and the wilding tribes was seen as a betrayal," he continued, at length. "Then, one evening, I was in my chambers reading over dispatches, and my squire came in to tell me there had been news of a missing ranger. He was our first ranger and one of our finest men, so I was keen to hear it. I followed my squire outside and saw a group of brothers all conferring together. I ran to catch them up, but when they parted to let me through, I saw they had nailed a sign to a post and painted the word traitor on it, understandably insulted. I turned back to find out what they meant by it. But when I did, they had all drawn daggers and took it turn to stick the blade in. I blacked out, I died, and then I woke up in the Mountains of the Moon 20 years in the past." "Well, that explains why I've never heard of any of this," she replied, wide-eyed and utterly baffled. "Just so I'm clear, you're telling me you're from the future?" Before he could answer, she laughed like it was all some grand jest. But she soon composed herself and began muttering about his stab wounds. The maester said it was a miracle you survived. The knife went through your heart. Right through the heart tissues, she muttered. We all know you ought to be dead. There's no explanation. When she trailed off into silence, he took up the slack. I bet all my money on Rhaegar to win because I already knew he would. I tried to warn you about him crowning you Queen of Love and Beauty because I knew he would. My father is here and he told us children all about this tourney. I tried to warn you about Rhaegar because we were told he was a rapist who, well, never mind that, just now. I think we might have been lied to. Her gaze snapped back up to him, her expression intense and scrutinizing. It certainly sounds like you need to tell me. Who was he supposed to have raped? Dismayed, Jon felt his heart sink. Well, you, as it happens. Lyanna laughed again. No man will rape me, Jon. I'd tear it off and shove it down his throat. I thought as much, he answered. She shook her head and topped up both their glasses. Here's what I think. When you were attacked, you must have been unconscious for quite some time. I think, perhaps, you dreamed all this stuff about the Watch and the others, and when you awoke, something happened in your head to make you think it was real. Your bedchamber in Winterfell is the first door on the left of the turnpike stair of the South Tower, he cut over her. There's a loose brick to the left of the fireplace. If you pull it right out, you can see where you engraved your name into the back of it. The year is marked as 2078 AC. She gasped audibly, almost dropping her glass and the sword alike. Gods, Jon, I did that when I was 10. I'd almost forgotten it myself. How could you possibly have known? The questions seemed to be directed more at herself than anyone else. While she pondered that, he described the castle in as much detail as he could rightly recall. He named the rooms, the layout, and the quirks of the fortress. He knew the crypts, the rusted swords, and the dire wolf statues. He knew the missing gargoyle on the battlements, fallen in ages gone by. He knew every crack in the flagstones and even some of the older members of staff. He knew things about Winterfell only those who lived there could know, and she knew he was no servant. She would have known him if he was. By the time he finished, she looked back at him in mystified silence. It was impossible to believe, but there was no other explanation. The conflict between truth and logic was being fought out in her manners and expressions. One second she looked resolute, but the next full of doubt, tremulous and shaky. She got to her feet and began pacing the room. She'd brought her glass with her and drank from it without realizing it was empty. Even after she took a sip, she didn't seem to realize it was empty. Her brain was functioning elsewhere. Had the circumstances been any different, he would have laughed. Gods, I thought you were Ned. She said, me and the boys couldn't get over how much you looked like Ned. And I knew, right from the off, that you were a Northman. There's no hiding that accent. You even have Ned's brooding nature about you. But it's madness. Complete madness. Ned's my father, he said. Don't you see why I couldn't tell the truth? She put down the empty glass and buried her face in her hands. No, no, no. This cannot be right. He watched her in deepening sadness. There was no hope of getting anyone to believe him, no matter what he knew. If he was lucky, she would have him cast out to shift for himself. If he was unlucky, she would have him locked up as a madman and the key thrown into the depths of the god's eye. Although the pacing had started again, Lyanna soon fell still again. Still and contemplative. When you came to on the mountainside and we spoke, you asked if Ned had a sweetheart somewhere. I laughed and said Ned would never do that. It's true that you don't know who your mother is, isn't it? Jon nodded. He never told me anything and he forbade his wife from talking about it. She turned to him with a frown on her face. That's passing strange. That's not the Ned I know at all. But that's what he did, Jon replied. Look, I don't expect you to believe me. All I ask is that you don't have me locked up. I'm not mad, and I mean you no harm at all. But this is the truth. This is what's happened. Her expression softened as she closed the gap between them. She kept her eyes trained on him, unflinching, but kind and gentle. The way she usually looked at him, when they were close enough, she cupped his chin in her hands and peered into his eyes. You're Stark right enough. A Snow, he corrected her. A minor detail, nephew, she laughed, but not unkindly. She let go of his face. Who found my name scratched into the brick? Your niece, Arya Stark, he replied. She's just like you, in looks, in temperament. She chuckled dryly. Poor girl. Then she heaved another sigh and threw her hands up in the air. This is madness. There must be some explanation as to how you know all this. But there isn't. And all that money you bet on Rhaegar to win, well, I think we'd all do the same if we had that kind of foreknowledge. And thank you for trying to warn me about Rhaegar. I did wonder how you seemed to know all these things, and all those convenient excuses you had for how you knew. Jon himself managed to laugh. Forgive me, I did want to tell you, but how could I? I know, she replied. I understand. If I found myself 20 years in the past, I know I'd fear telling people. They'd think me mad, as part of me also thinks you are mad. And I cannot deny it. It's a tall story to swallow, but the evidence is all there, so I cannot disbelieve either. Through the haze of his own despondency, Jon could actually tell this was the best reaction he could have hoped for. She wasn't throwing him out. She wasn't laughing him all the way back to the wall either. She was genuinely doing her best to understand it and explain it. He didn't think he could have done the same for someone else in his position. It is not in my nature to lie, he stated. Lord Stark raised me better than that. It's why my story kept changing. The lie was hard to live up to. When I was with the wildlings, all I had to do was pretend to be a deserter. Here, I had to make up a whole new family. She frowned again just then. Ned is Lord Stark? Inwardly, Jon cursed. Uncle Brandon is, well, no, she said, holding up her hand. If Ned is Lord of Winterfell, then there can only be one explanation, and I don't need to know. Nor does Bran, Jon. Life is fragile. We all know that. Of course, he replied, unwilling to burden her just yet anyway. The ink is dry, I can change nothing. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she held him in a mischievously curious look. What about me? You didn't seem to recognize me up on that mountain. Mind you, I must be quite old in your time. He felt his heart being squeezed painfully. You? We never see you, Leah. You're too busy and happy. With your husband and children. They love you. You love them more than anything else in the world. You're far too busy to come and visit us at Winterfell. They need you far more than us, and we all understand that. Another frown puckered her brow. That really doesn't sound like me. You're a coward, his inner voice informed him. But he could hardly say you're dead, not when that death was due to happen in just over a year. If he couldn't save her, there was no use in scaring her. To his intense relief, she dropped the subject. Belief is a very strong word for what I feel right now. Jon, this is simply too much to take in at once. But I'm happy to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I can tell from looking at you and listening that you're convinced this is what's happened to you. Jon shrugged. So, what are you saying? That you both believe me and you don't believe me. I'm saying I have no other explanation, she pointed out. Your word is the best I have right now, and I know you believe it. So, on that basis, we better think of something to tell Rhaegar, that is. If you still think he has the answer to your war against the others. Rhaegar cannot be told about all this, he stated, abruptly. He'll think me mad. Just as I do, I know, she replied, and he won't be as wonderfully understanding as I am. Exactly, he laughed. Look, we'll think of something. But let's leave it until tomorrow. We should both sleep. Jon didn't think he would, but he knew they were both exhausted. He nodded, turning toward the antechamber where she often let him sleep when they talked into the night. Whether she believed him or not, however, he suddenly realized he felt 100 times later for having unburdened himself. Sansa lay sleeping, wrapped up in the Red Woman's cloak. After some warm food, she had settled quickly and sleep wasn't far behind. Still, Bran resolved to watch over her through the night. It looked as if she hadn't slept properly since before leaving Castle Black, and he was not about to disturb her for anything. For all he knew, she hadn't slept properly since leaving King's Landing. As such, even the truth and their strange mission could wait until morning. Meanwhile, the Red Woman sat with him, complaining of the lack of fire. We're inside a tree, he pointed out. Light a fire in here, and what do you think will happen? She didn't need to answer, but she still complained until the children agreed she could light one outside, so long as she kept it under control. Now, several hours later, she returned while Brienne, Pod, and Benjen all talked in another room some distance away. The others, and the Whites, were their concern. I've seen you in the fires, she said at length. You and your wolf. First you're a boy, then you're a wolf, and then you're a boy again. He looked up at her, concerned. I'm a warg. Sansa, Jon. Arya and Rickon are, too. Melisandre smiled knowingly. But we know you're far more powerful than they. Bran just shrugged. He didn't want to brag. but he knew she was right. Why is Rexlier showing me to you? Did you think I was your enemy? Maybe, she confessed, glancing up nervously at the three-eyed raven. It wouldn't be the first time I was wrong. After my brother was stabbed, what did you do? He asked, no longer caring what she thought of him or her fires. Nothing, at first, she confessed without guilt. Sagarnavas, a man I travel with, convinced me to try and use my powers to bring him back. The Lord Commander was dead. For sure, after I agreed, I performed all the necessary rites and ceremonies. I thought I failed, but he gasped for air. So loud Davos came running out, shouting, he's alive, but Jon did not awaken, and he sleeps to this day. Breathing, sleeping, sometimes murmuring, but never awakening. He hasn't awoken because he's 20 years in the past, he stated, baldly. It was his hope that she would know why or that she had heard of it happening before. But all she did was frown and cock her head, quizzically. It was clear she was as flummoxed as he was, to his dismay. What do you mean? I saw him in my visions speaking with our dead aunt, he explained. Later I was able to speak with him in person. He's at the tourney of Harrenhal, with our family. That tourney happened almost 20 years ago, and he's there. How did he get there? Did Rosier send him? Surely you know something. Her expression became blank. If so, then Rosier has a purpose. You say Jon is with your family. Bran nodded. Many of them are dead now. Some died before we were born. All I can do is explore what happened in that time using the trees. Because Jon is just stuck there while I can go back and forth. So far I've turned up nothing. Well, nothing except that Rhaegar Targaryen might not have been a rapist. Jon seems to think he and our aunt were in love. This is so strange, she said, finally betraying some human feelings. It felt more satisfying to Bran than her simply stating that Rhaenyra had her as a purpose. Even if it makes no sense from here, there must be a reason why Jon's gone back. There must be someone there he needs to meet, or something he needs to do. But the past cannot be changed, which I'm sure you know. He's trying, he stated. After the tourney, our aunt was abducted and raped by Rhaegar Targaryen, and she died because of it. Our father went to war and met Jon's mother, whose name we don't know. Maybe he needs to find her. She might even have what Relhor is looking for. Could you find out more in your fires? If they reveal things to you, they will give you the name of his mother. Melisandre frowned, her red eyes narrowed as she regarded Bran closely. I can promise you nothing, Brandon Stark, but I will call upon the Lord of Light to show me something. Disappointed, he fell silent and watched her leave. All through the conversation, he had swung between thinking she knew every secret of the universe to believing she couldn't even tie a bootlace. Poor Jon, he thought to himself, catapulted back in time by one fanatic's incompetence. Rosier awoke to a broad morning light streaming through the drapes of his windows. Another fine spring day, emphasizing his empty room and silent corridors. His mouth tasted like a small animal had died in it, so he rolled out of bed and gargled lemon and mint water. The taste was so tart he grimaced all through the process and spat it out into a porcelain bowl as if it had done him some personal wrong. His body servants helped him to dress, but they didn't help his mood as they explained that no one had come calling, no one had left any messages, and no one needed him. The only thing alleviating his dour mood was the knowledge that his father had finally packed up and returned to King's Landing. Seeing no reason to leave his room, he pulled back the heavy velvet drapes and looked over the scorched ruins of Harrenhal. The scars of Balerion, the Black Dread, still marred the turrets and towers all around him. Scars still visible, but the dragons long gone. But as he watched the now empty grounds, he saw two figures walking across the flowstone yard. He was too far above to make out their faces, so watched and waiting until they passed beneath the stone archway, and a smile spread across his face at last. Admit Lady Stark and her companion immediately, he called out to the nearest groom. Yes, your grace, he replied, before bowing out of the room. While he waited, he instructed another servant to prepare a light meal on which they could all break their fast. That looked like Jon, another man he was keen to speak to, seeing as he didn't seem to exist, and by the time they arrived, he was more than ready to receive them. Your grace, they chorused. Lie curtsied, and Jon knelt until he bid them rise. I thought you would both be gone by now. Did you speak to Lord Brandon? Lyanna looked blank, answering his question immediately. I think he's sleeping off last night's celebrations, your grace. More than likely, he agreed. Well, sit, both of you. Join me for breakfast. To his relief, they both accepted the invitation and sat at the newly prepared table. They were out on the terrace in the morning sun and overlooking the flowstone yard. With the tourney events concluded, it was peaceful and they could talk uninterrupted. "This is not an entirely social visit," Lyanna stated. He remembered the last time they spoke, when she hit him with the laurel he gave her. "I didn't think it would be." "It's about the prophesy," Jon explained. "The prince that was promised." Of all the reasons he had tried to guess as the nature of this visit, that one hadn't crossed the prince's mind. Somewhat taken aback, he set down the honeycomb he was using to cover his wheaten bread. Given how many people secretly thought him mad for indulging these ancient prophecies, he became wary. "What about it?" he asked, tersely. Jon swallowed his bread and washed it down with some tea before continuing. "It's not so much the prince that was promised, your grace. More his purpose in life. We all know the story that Awry tempered a special blade that won the war for the Dawn against the others, driving them back into the land of always winter. That's the basic gist of it," he confirmed. "They say he's going to be reborn under salt and smoke, to wake dragons from stone and so on and so forth." "Yes, but the original Awry beat the others," Jon said, pulling the subject back around to the supernatural. "Is that you think your Awry will do?" "They say the war is coming, and I believe them," said Rhaegar, still reluctant to lay himself open to ridicule. "Well, I know it's coming, and I know when it will come," Jon said, looking him dead in the eye. "I've seen the others, and I've seen the armies of the dead north of the wall." Rhaegar shifted his gaze to Lyanna, who was helping herself to a boiled egg. She paused and looked up at him, earnestly. "Your Grace, I think you need to hear him out," she said. "I wouldn't have brought him here, otherwise—" "Go on, then," he urged Jon. While Jon talked, he sat back and listened intently. The longer it went on, the more he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Finally, someone believed him. Finally, someone was willing to listen. "So you were a brother of the Night's Watch when you were attacked by wildlings and given temporary leave?" he asked. Something about that seemed odd, but he did not question its sincerity. "When do they expect you back?" "Just as soon as I'm healed," answered Jon. "Just so you know," Lyanna added, "I remember overhearing my father discussing the others with his master-at-arms. We actually have heard rumors of sightings, but Jon confirms it, which is why I brought him straight to you. The only problem was, he thought, was that the prince that was promised is currently still in swaddling and sucking at the teat of his wet nurse. But still, he had the dragon egg." Rising from his seat, he excused himself and went to fetch the box he kept it in. He brought the box back to the table and opened it for Jon to see. "Pick it up," he instructed. Jon seemed hesitant at first, but soon picked it up and cradled it in his cupped hands. His expression changed, curious and distant, as if trying to figure something out. "It's moving," he said, glancing up at him. "It's hot and it's moving." Rhaegar smiled, glancing over at Lyanna. "I told you, it's alive." Still, she did not look convinced. "Let me try," she said. Jon passed over the egg and she held it tenderly, prodded at the smooth surface of the stone shell. "No, it's just stone. How come you two can feel it move and I can't?" "What?" Jon spluttered. "That is alive. I'm telling you, I felt it move. Try harder, maybe you're holding too tight." Lyanna still looked like the victim of some great injustice. "Well, if we can hatch that, the others won't stand a chance of taking the realm," Rhaegar explained. "My family are dragon riders. If we can hatch this, then we can hatch ours." "Are there others?" Jon asked, taking the egg back from Lyanna. "On Dragonstone, but I'm not sure where," he confessed. "My father brought this to Summerhall, and it changed on the night of the fire from solid stone to something half alive, the same night I was born. It made me wonder if I had done it, but instead I think it will be my children who ride the dragons, and I need one more. One more child, that is. If I can bring that to pass, then the dragon will have its 3 heads and we're sure of victory." He couldn't help but glance at Lyanna, despite all that had happened since they last spoke, civilly to each other. "Ice and fire," he reminded himself. "Ice and fire." "I don't think the prophecy matters," Jon stated. "All we need is fire. A lot of fire." The other man sunk in his estimation. "Of course the prophecy matters. If we can fulfill that, then the dragons will rise again. The dragons rise, and ice monsters fall. It stands to reason." Jon still seemed to believe that fire alone could defeat his foe, while Lyanna looked perplexed still. But he knew he was making headway now. It was enough to renew his flagging hopes, to revive his determination to bring the prophecy to pass. Later, when he was showing them out of his chambers, Lyanna paused and whispered in his ear, "Godswood nightfall." She set out as soon as the sun set, a hood pulled up over her head to ward off the evening chills. Sometimes it didn't feel like spring at all. It grew cold quickly, and rain showers fell out of nowhere. 4 seasons in one day, she often thought. Still, she honored her promise and headed to the Godswood. The ground was soft and springy beneath her feet, still wet from the rain, and even the animals seemed to prefer their burrows and sets. They had more sense than her. All that day she had been dwelling on what Jon had said, and several hours later she still had no idea what to make of it. But something in her stirred. Something told her she would be a fool to dismiss him. Only a Stark or a lifelong servant of Winterfell would know what he knew about the castle. That afternoon, she had sought out her brothers to see if they had told him inside information as part of some kind of joke on her. But they hadn't. Brandon hadn't even seen Jon in days, and was more preoccupied with talking her into remaining at Harrenhal. Now Brandon had gone and taken Benjen with him. Ned and Robert had returned to the Awry, and she was alone with her confusion. When she reached the twisted weirwood, she averted her gaze from that angry face and sat down on a dry spot beneath its boughs. In this place, the river bubbling past soothed her troubles, and the old gods gave her comfort. Once settled, she let Brandon into her thoughts. Jon had more than implied that Brandon would die before ever becoming Lord of Winterfell, and she thought the old gods ought to know. "Poor Bran," she murmured, touching the pale trunk of the tree. The bark was smooth and silver beneath the pads of her fingers. "And what about me?" If Jon really was who he said he was and from where he said he was from, then she didn't like what he had said about her, that she was happy with her husband and children, far too happy to return to Winterfell. Ever. He did not know her, either. He had not recognized her before the introduction on that mountainside. How curious. His description of her future self was all too picture-perfect. A lie. But it seemed a well-intended lie. You tell someone a beautiful lie like that because you want to protect them from a terrible reality. Sometimes she acted the fool, but wasn't really a fool. "Too blissfully happy with my husband and children to ever come back home?" she asked the tree. "That could never be, because I'd never be happy away from my home and my people. No, I think perhaps I too am dead in his time. Death is the only thing that could stop me being with them." Death defined life. Lyanna knew that as much as anyone, no one is immortal, but now she felt a chill creep over her that had little to do with the temperature inside the Godswood. It was the chill of her own mortality. It was the knowledge that, perhaps, her time was shorter than even she imagined. "Maybe I have it all wrong, and Jon is right," she said aloud to the weirwood. "But what if I don't have it all wrong? I'm not prepared to take the risk, and at the moment I am definitely alive. Before I die, I want to live." The old gods remained silent, but she continued her conversation with them. She didn't wish to know the causes, reasons, or wherefores of her own demise. She certainly didn't wish to know when. If she knew when, she would waste her time dwelling on that moment or fighting to avoid it, running instead of living. "For what it's worth," she said aloud, "I hope I'm reading far too much into this. I hope Jon's just had a knock on the head and all of this is in his imagination. But I won't take the risk, and my mind is made up." "Is it?" a man answered. She spun on her heels to where Rhaegar stepped out from between 2 trees. "Forgive me, you were communing with your gods, and I interrupted." "No, your grace, stay," she implored. He looked relieved. "Why did you invite me here?" "'Cause I want you to know," she began, then faltered until she composed herself. "Jon said something today which made me realize something, that life is short and unpredictable. So yes, your grace, I will come with you. I love you, and I will stand with you, come what may." For a long moment, he didn't seem to take it in. His eyes narrowed, as if suspecting some trick. "Do you mean it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Are you sure?" Lyanna nodded. "I've never been more certain of anything." She heard him draw a deep and tremulous breath. "There will be a scandal so soon after Elia's left me. But not even your father can disapprove once you're Queen of Westeros." "He will come around," she said. "I'll return to Winterfell and explain everything. He will be upset. I know, angry even. But once he knows how serious this is, he will come around." "But first you must lie low," he cautioned. "Remember, my father is still king. Your brother already knows you're staying here, so hold tight." Lyanna nodded. "Of course. Once your father is gone, we can be married." No, he replied. We can be married as soon as Yatzia and I release each other from our vows. It will take a month or so. That's all. Rather than jubilant, it made her nervous and edgy. So much could go wrong. So much was at stake. Before she could get too nervous, he had closed the gap between them and kissed her deeply. When they drew apart, she wondered again what Jon had told her. Why did everyone think Rhaegar raped her? You would never hurt me, would you? She asked. Never, he assured her. What makes you ask? She smiled and laughed it off. Nothing. Just an overact of imagination. For the first time, they left the Godswood together. Since the day she left Winterfell as a child, Sansa had absorbed a lot of shocks. The downfall and murder of her father, Joffrey being an absolute shit, and her forced marriage to Tyrion Lannister. Her brother and mother had been murdered. Her home had been stolen, and she had unwittingly played a role in the murder of a king. She had been a traitor's daughter and a rebel sister. Then she was a wanted fugitive masquerading as Patyr Baelish's bastard daughter. Then she married Ramsay Bolton before being rescued by the same man she thought had murdered her other two brothers. She reached a safe haven, only to find her protector had been stabbed by his own brethren. She was used to shocks. She almost expected them. And even when she expected them, the shocks still lived up to their name and shocked the sense right out of her. By the time she reached Bran's tree and sat there ladling a bitter-tasting red paste into her mouth, she thought she might be beyond shocks. Then Bran sat beside her and told her what had happened to Jon after he was stabbed and Lady Melisandre's attempts to bring him back. By the time he finished talking and Sansa knew as much as he did, all she could do was put down her bowl and say, I thought nothing could shock me anymore, but I think you've proved me wrong. Bran urged her to finish the paste, which she did while sat cross-legged on a shelf of roots inside the vast weirwood. While she ate, she was able to think. There was one other thing all life's shocks had taught her. It was how to adapt and survive. This was no different, only now she had to make sure Jon and Bran survived too. This was their new reality, and she had to learn to work with it. Lady Melisandre knows what she is doing, she pointed out, spotting the Red Woman talking to Uncle Benjen by the escape tunnel. I've seen her do amazing things with fire. She lit a fire out of nothing and used it to kill others, and they fled before her. Even if she did not intend to send Jon back in time, her magic did, and there's a reason for it. It won't be an accident. Anyway, Uncle Benjen is over there. Asking him is a lot faster than traveling back in time. Brain's face flushed, and she realized he hadn't even thought to ask their uncle since he arrived. It occurred to her he might have worked himself up into a state to the point where he wasn't thinking straight. Brain, she said, not unkindly. That Uncle Benjen over there is the same Uncle Benjen who was at Harrenhal. But I still want to see it for myself, though, if we can. I want to see our father when he was a boy, and Lyanna and Uncle Brandon, and Benjen too, of course. Overhearing his name, the man himself called over, Is it just me, or my ears starting to burn? Forgive me, Uncle, we were just discussing Jon's predicament, she replied, but you can tell us yourself what happened there, and what it is Jon might need to do. At that, both Benjen and Melisandre came over to join them. Meera had been stewing a hot drink for them all, and she reappeared as well, with Hodor helping her carry the cups of honey mead. Sansa welcomed it, now that she had finished the bitter and foul-tasting paste. Only the thought of seeing Jon again had compelled her to eat the lot. Thank you, Meera. Come and sit beside me, she said, making room for the Crannog girl. Meanwhile, Benjen had reached for one of the lanterns hanging from a branch and placed it on the floor in the middle of their circle. Above them, the three-eyed raven slept on, slumped over in his tangle of roots. Or so it seemed to Sansa. He looked half dead. The others, Brienne, Pod, and Tormund, were all out hunting that night's supper. Uncle Ben, said Sansa, if the ink is dry and we're not doing anything that hasn't already been done before, then surely you would remember Jon being at Harrenhal. Even Father would have remembered. But the man shrugged, shaking his head. There was someone Lyanna met, but thinking on it, I'd swear it was my Lady Reed's father, Lord Howland. Father said Lady Lyanna saved his life, Meera confirmed. He talked about her all the time. Benjen smiled, swirling the contents of his cup. Did Lord Howland ever tell you who the Knight of the Laughing Tree was? No, Meera retorted. He told us everything, except that, and it puzzles me. Yorvis was dead by then, the same as Lyanna and Rhaegar. So what was the big secret? Was it out of respect for King Robert? Sansa asked, looking to Meera. Meera laughed. Hardly. He thought Robert overbearing and arrogant. Even as Sansa had speculated, It made no sense to her. It wasn't as if Robert would be passing through the neck to even hear Howland Reed talking of Lyanna and her exploits. But one thing that did occur to her was that Lyanna was at the center of everything, and radiac. So far, all Bran's discoveries had been about them. Jon was with them in person, seemingly out of the blue. It was their story Bran and Jon had unearthed the most discrepancies in, and it was those two that Sansa could not help but home in on now. Then, as she mulled it over, she remembered something else. Something that, at the time, she thought passing strange, and then forgot soon after as her life delivered its next dose of shockingly awful events. When Baelish brought me to Winterfell to marry Ramsay, we went down to the crypts, and I told him who Lyanna was and what happened to her, she recalled. When I told him she was abducted and raped, he gave me this look. A sly look he gives everyone when he knows they're talking horse shit. I remember it because he made me feel like a liar. Because it was a lie, Benjiane confessed, meeting her gaze through the light of the lantern. Silence fell as everyone else waited for him to continue, which he did after drawing a deep breath. It was not a lie you consciously told, niece. It was a lie you were all raised on. But now all those at the center of the lie are cold in their graves, myself and Lord Reed notwithstanding. And I beg your father's pardon, Lady Meera, for betraying his trust now. Meera was quick to assure him he would understand Lord Stark, especially now, with so much at stake. Well then, here's the short version, said Benjen. Rhaegar loved Lyanna, and Lyanna loved him back. Everyone knew it, even your father. Personally, I think Robert could not deal with the rejection and just took it into his head that she had been abducted and raped. Sansa was aghast. King Robert went to war because his pride was wounded. Robert didn't start the war, Benjen corrected her. Aerys did, when he lynched my brother and burned my father. Shame about Rhaegar. Though, from what I saw of him, he was perfectly decent sort. Stunned, Sansa found herself staring vacantly into the middle distance. People knew, her father knew. Everyone knew, except them, the ones left picking up the pieces. Even Pater Baelish knew, she murmured to herself more than anyone else. His name is familiar, said Benjen. Sansa, who is he? Jolted out of her thoughts, she met his gaze across the small space dividing them. He was Master of Coin for King Robert. He grew up at River Run with my mother and loved her. Benjen sighed heavily. One hand slapped against his forehead. Of course, Brandon dueled with him for Cat's hand in marriage. Cut him up pretty bad, too. Brandon was bragging about it when we all met at Harrenhal. I remember now. Sansa felt her hackles rising, but kept her suspicions to herself, for now. None of them knew Baidias as she did, and it would take too long to explain. Before she could say anything, she heard a voice calling Bran's name. She looked around to see who it was, but none of the others seemed to have heard it, except Bran. Sansa, did you hear that? He asked. She nodded. Bran smiled. Good. The paste worked. That was Jon calling. We need to go now? Her belly squirmed with apprehension and excitement as she reached for her brother's hand. Remembering his earlier instructions, she shuffled over to the tree root and took one in her free hand and felt her eyes rolling to the back of her head as the world turned black. Jon stood back from the tree and waited, breath held until he heard the sound of scrambling feet. Only one, he thought, until Bran spoke and not to him. You're all right, Sansa, he said. You've done it. Jon swung around the trunk of the tree, stopping dead when he saw his sister brushing down the front of her cloak. It took a split second for her to notice him, too. Then her gaze locked into his. Without hesitation, he caught her in a tight hug and held her close for longer than he cared to keep track of. Jon, oh dear gods, Jon, it's really you, she said, voice muffled by his shoulder. Bran took himself off into the godswood, affording them some privacy. Meanwhile, Jon lowered her carefully to the ground, where they lay in each other's arms beneath the boughs of the weirwood tree. When they looked to one another again, neither felt inclined to pretend they hadn't been crying. Thank the gods you're safe, he said, kissing her tenderly. I swear, no one will ever hurt you again. How he intended to keep that promise while stranded in the past, he didn't know. He just knew he would, somehow, when they finally separated and composed themselves. They burst out laughing with relief. Such was the erratic nature of human emotion. Then Jon stood up first and held out his hand to help her up. Come on, let's walk, he suggested, and tell me everything that happened. Now that the tourney was over, Harrenhal was empty but for Lyanna and Rhaegar. Even Rhaegar was leaving soon, so Jon had no worries about walking around and seemingly talking to himself. Only the state of the grounds betrayed what had just happened here. Refuse and discarded food wrappings fluttered on the soft breeze like so many autumn leaves. Bits of horse bridle and scraps of silk favors cut from maidens' hankies were caught on the splintered stands. That was all that remained of the pomp and chivalry. Scraps of silk and a bad smell. Over it all, the broken towers of Harrenhal itself lowered ominously, their shadows long and disjointed. As they walked, Sansa recounted what had happened to her from the moment she escaped King's Landing until she reached Bran's tree. It didn't take long for his mood to reflect his desolate surroundings. Rhaegar frowned as he let himself into Lyanna's apartments. I swear I just saw Jon walking around the flowstone yard talking to himself. Lyanna turned from the flowers she was fussing over and frowned at him. Everyone does that, don't they? As an afterthought, she added, I know I do. The prince laughed as he removed the sack from his shoulder and placed it carefully on the table in the presence chamber. Inside was the box with his dragon egg inside. Take good care of her for me, won't you? He asked. Once what needs to be done is done, I will come back for her. She approached the box and flipped open the lid, running a finger over the smooth shell. He knew how much she loved the coloring of the egg. It was all silver and blue swirls, the colors diffusing into each other seamlessly. How do you know it's a girl? Rhaegar shrugged. Strictly speaking, dragons are intersex. So, she's both male and female. But to me, she's a girl. A particularly lovely girl, I might add. The last thing he wanted was for Daenerys to get his hands on it. All he asked was that the egg was well hidden and safe from whatever battles lay ahead. Once he was king and the third head of the dragon had been born, then it would be ready for the hatching. Closing the lid again, he nudged it closer to Lyanna and kissed her lips. I'll miss you, he said, embracing her. When I return, we will be married. She sighed deeply. I'll miss you too. Please hurry back. The moment of separation came, and Rhaegar wasn't one to draw it out. He kissed her one more time, ran his hands through her hair, and turned sharply toward the door. It was time to begin. That evening, Jon sat at the table and used his fork to push some food around a plate. He was dimly aware of Lyanna watching him, worry etched in her face. But he couldn't bring himself to talk to her. After that, he found himself in a large stone bath and sat stock still until he realized that the water had grown cold. He hadn't even noticed the temperature steadily decreasing. Done with his cold bath, he returned to his chambers and made ready for bed. Sleep eluded him as he stared up at the canopy of his four-poster. He didn't even notice that he'd been crying, but the tears slipped down his face anyway. It was dark, and there was no one to see, so he didn't care even when he did notice. Footsteps padded up to his bedroom door, but he rolled over at the sound of the knock on his door. When it opened, and soft candlelight sent the darkness into relief, he closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep. But Lyanna was not fooled. I know you're awake. He heard her placing the candle on his bedside table, followed soon after by the mattress dipping where she sat beside him. She lay reclined leisurely, placing one hand on his bare shoulder. Talk to me, she said quietly. All evening, you've been moping around with a face like a slapped arse. I'm worried. There was no point ignoring her. It wasn't worth the effort. There's things I must not tell you, but if I start, I won't be able to stop myself. Is it about the future? She asked. She hit the spot and it hurt. He wished he could tell her everything. About Robert being king and Cersei his queen and all the storms that union brought to the Stark's halls. But he didn't see how he could, and he didn't see how it could help. Not with her being 18 years dead. You didn't fool me, Jon, she continued. Whatever the future holds, I know I'm not part of it. His heart sank again as he turned onto his back, forcing her to shift over a little. When he got her in his line of vision, he could see she was calm, even half smiling at him in the semi-darkness. You are part of it, he stated. In one form or another. Lyanna made no reply, drew a deep breath, and carried on watching him with that half-smile on her face. Her hair and eyes were dark as night in the poor light. Half a ghost already. I still can't get my head around where you've come from, she eventually continued. From the little you've told me, and what little you've said of your sisters, things don't seem so good at your end. Am I right in thinking it's something to do with that? It's not my sisters, he said. Well, it is, but it isn't. Lyanna laughed. It is, but it isn't? And to think you men are always complaining us women can never get to the point. She was only teasing him good-naturedly, trying to get a rise from him, but it wasn't working. Realizing the fact, she changed tack. "Tell me then, how many children does Ned have?" "5 and me," Jon replied. "Robb's the eldest, then Sansa. Arya came next, then Bran and Rickon. I'm a little younger than Robb. Apart from us, there was Theon, Balon Greyjoy's youngest son and father's ward. There must always be a Bran in House Stark," she laughed, toying with a loose thread in his blankets. She was sitting with her legs curled under her now, but he couldn't begin to fathom what she was thinking. Whether she was envisioning a future she already knew had nothing to do with her, or trying to second-guess how these things came to be. "So, it's not Sansa or Arya keeping you awake. Which of your brothers is it?" "Robb," he admitted. "He wasn't just my brother, he was my closest friend, and I loved him so much I'd have followed him to hell and back, had he asked. But he did something unforgivable, and now innocent people are suffering for it." "Unforgivable is a very big word, Jon," she said. "What could possibly be that bad?" "He rebelled against the crown after his lords declared him king in the north," he explained. "At first it went well, but he was betrayed and he ended up losing Winterfell, the north, and his life. Thousands of Stark bannermen were slaughtered at the Twins. The Boltons were given wardship of the north. Sansa was forced to marry Rose Bolton's son." Lyanna was silent as she tried to make sense of it. "Are you telling me that, in 20 years from now, the Boltons will have the north in Winterfell? Where is Ned?" "Dead," he stated bluntly. "He was Hand of the King, but Cersei Lannister conspired his downfall and execution. That was why Robb rebelled." She was wide-eyed and silent, motionless as if the future had turned her to stone. "Lysia, it's bad. We really have lost everything," he continued. "Father married Catelyn Tully in Brandon's place, so the Riverlands supported him. He was meant to marry a daughter of Walder Frey in return for use of that damn bridge of his and a few thousand extra fighting men. But he broke his oath and married a girl from the Westerlands. Robb executed one of his own lords and lost several thousand men overnight. He trusted an Ironborn, which led to the loss of Winterfell. Instead of riding back north to defend his own home, he trusted the Boltons to do it. He put his gains in the Riverlands first, instead of prioritizing his own people. Greed and stupidity led us to hell." "And my niece Sansa is married to Domeric Bolton?" she asked. "Roose is an utter cunt, but Domeric's a nice enough boy. I do not think he would be cruel." "Domeric's dead," Jon cut in. "Rosia's legitimized bastard killed him, or so they say. Now they have Winterfell, and Ramsay Bolton is holding it in his father's name. Our servants have been flayed, our people live in fear, and my sister was raped and beaten every night until she escaped. Now I'm stuck here, unable to help anyone." Lyanna fell silent again as she slowly rose from the bed and began pacing the floorboards. Too despondent to get up himself, Jon contented himself with tracking her movements as she passed to and fro, chewing nervously at the tip of her index finger. After what seemed an age, she stopped abruptly, fixing him in a calculating look. He heard a breath hitching in her throat, but if she was going to speak, she suffered a last-minute change of heart, then fled the room. Thinking to go after her, he rolled off the bed and began pulling on his breeches. But before long, he heard her hurrying back inside. When she reached the bedside, she dropped a large wooden box on the bed and opened the clasp. Inside the box, the dragon egg caught the candlelight and shimmered sweetly. "You say it's alive," she said breathlessly. Confused, Jon frowned at her. "Yes, but—" "Pick it up," she snapped. He did so, and once more he could feel the heat inside, pulsing like a heartbeat. Beneath the thin shell, small wings and a long sinuous tail brushed the membrane under his fingers. It was alive in there. He could feel it. He was half tempted to split the damn thing open and pull the dragon out himself. But why could she not feel it? He didn't have time to wonder. "Rhaegar needs it well hidden until after the war against his father," she said. "I was already considering the crypts of Winterfell anyway. What with this war against the dead coming, we needed it in the north, no matter who holds Winterfell." Even Rhaegar said so. Jon's mind cleared, and it felt like a beautiful dawn had broken through the dark clouds of his own introspection. His hands were trembling so much that he had to put the egg down before he dropped it. He stammered, then paused to compose himself. "If we can hatch this, then take it to Winterfell and hide it deep in the crypts, then—" Lyanna grinned as she finished the plan for him. "Give it 20 years and there's a fire-breathing surprise in store for the Boltons." "We both heard the stories," he said softly. "What if there's rumors of a dragon in Winterfell because we put it there?" "But we were told the stories too," Lyanna pointed out. Which means it must have been there when we were children. Did your father hear the stories when he was a boy? He asked. She shook her head, said he'd never heard such nonsense in his life, but I think he would have said that anyway, just to put us off. As the complications to their fledgling plan opened up to him, his hopes began to fade. He remembered the rose he gave to Bran that shriveled up and aged and died within seconds of passing through the time barrier. Without nourishment and food to help it grow, the dragon would just shrivel up and die like that rose did. How could he keep a dragon secretly living below Winterfell for so long? What would it eat? How would they get it down there and sustained for over 20 years? Who had the freedom to break the time barriers at will? Brian, Jon whispered, in reply to his own question. No, he knows absolutely nothing about dragons, Lyanna replied, thinking he meant her brother. Jon didn't bother to correct her. Giving himself a shake, he continued dressing himself. First things first, we need to hatch it. Does Rhaegar know how? To his dismay, she shook her head. He's trying to find out. Bran would know what to do, he thought to himself. Sansa might even have heard about Daenerys Targaryen while she was at court. There were bound to be rumors of how she went about hatching 3 dragons. It would be complicated. It was fraught with problems. But it was the only plan he had. A half-alive dragon was the only weapon he had. There's someone I need to speak to, he said. Someone I think might be able to help. To his relief, she didn't ask who. She just nodded. I'll check the library here. There's bound to be old books lying around. Given that they were in Harrenhal, he suspected the only dragon books in this library would be ones about flame-proofing your turret towers. Never mind nurturing dragons for use in combat. Still, there had to be a way. If there was a way, he inwardly resolved he would take back all Robb had lost. The rape and ruin of Sansa Stark would be answered with fire and blood. Thin mists wreathed a perfect circle of tree stumps, slowly melting away like ghosts under a summer sun. The beating of wings drew Jon's attention to the raven perched on one of the stumps, and he greeted it like an old friend. It cawed loudly at him, before flapping away into the pre-dawn gloom. Jon expected no less. It was just like that old bastard to bring him somewhere and then leave him to figure it out on his own. But he knew already, and triumph surged in him, making him feel like he'd bested fate. 3 stumps in a perfect circle, 31 of them. If he knelt and ran his hands across the surface, he could still feel the nicks and welts left by the axes of the first men as they cut down these sacred weirwoods. Time and the elements had smoothed down their rough and abrasive edges, but they still told their story. If he looked hard enough, he thought he might even see the blood of the children of the forest, who were massacred here. High Heart, a place sacred to the old gods, a shrine to those massacred in the brutal onslaught of the first men and their new religion. Standing straight again, Jon looked over his shoulder to where the god's eyes shimmered in the far distance. It was still silvery from moonlight, and the castle of Harrenhal was nothing but a blackened speck on the shore. The Isle of Faces, where the pact of peace between the children and the first men was signed, was shrouded in darkness still. Before him was a picture only partially revealed. "Why do you come to my hill?" Startled, Jon whirled around toward the source of the voice. His breath caught in his throat at the sight of her. Tiny she was, with white hair that trailed the ground and red eyes that glowered in the light of her lantern. In her other hand, a crooked black stick aided her in standing. She used it to lurch forward, closing the gap between them. "The three-eyed raven," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp poke of her walking stick. "Oof," he grunted as it hit him in the belly. "I've not had a moment's peace since you got here, wolf boy," the crone complained. The gone with you." He felt as if he'd been thrown off a cliff edge, plunging down and back into his own body as he awoke with a gasp. Still jittery from the dream, he rolled right out of bed and pulled back the shutters on his windows. He was back in Harrenhal in a room overlooking the God's Eye. The hour was late and the sun already up. Down in the yard below, Lyanna was walking arm in arm with Lord Went's eldest daughter, laughing inaudibly at some jest. Almost as if she had sensed him looking, she turned her face up to his window and waved. Saints have found Lady Reed beyond the door of the weirwood. Skinning the rabbits Tormund and Brienne had captured during the hunt. Close by, Pod was trying to light a fire with a flint. He was the first to see her. As always, he turned a deep and vivid shade of red and gulped loudly. No matter how friendly she tried to be, he was always the same. Shy, nervous, and awkward. "Good morning, Pod," she greeted him. In response, he gulped again and gestured towards some nearby bushes. He tried to speak before giving up and stumbling into the same bushes. Meera put down the rabbit and watched him go, a look of utter bemusement on her face. "What is wrong with him?" she asked, looking up at Sansa. "Nothing, he's just very shy," she answered, sitting beside the Cranding girl. "I've known him for years, and he's actually not as bad as he was." "That's all right then," replied Meera. "I was worried in case a southern village was missing its idiot." Sansa laughed. "I know how it looks, but don't underestimate him. He saved Tyrion Lannister's life at the Battle of Blackwater. If it had been anyone else, he'd have gotten a knighthood and some good land for his valor." Meera frowned. "He's too shy for a reward?" "Oh no," she corrected. "I meant if he had saved anyone other than Lord Tyrion, but that's the Queen's brother. And it was the Queen who sent a Kingsguard out into the field to kill him, and make it look like one of Stannis' men had done it," Sansa explained. "The fool didn't even have the sense to take his cloak off. He certainly didn't reckon on Pod and his pike." "Poor Pod," Meera retorted. "He's a hero and no one cared." Sansa smiled as she recalled the reward he did get. She remembered overhearing Tyrion talking to Bran about it. "Well, that's not quite true," she explained, leaning in close to the other girl. "Let's just say the girls in Baelish's brothel weren't quite prepared for Pod and his pike either." Meera's eyes widened before she burst out laughing. "No." Sansa grinned. "Oh, yes." As they spoke, the man himself reappeared, struggling with an armful of chopped logs for Melisandre's fire. He almost dropped a lot when he saw the two girls watching him, desperately suppressing their giggles. Mercifully, he valiantly kept himself together and carried on toward the fire pit set up well away from their tree. "Who knew?" Meera whispered, just as he vanished from view. Sansa shrugged and changed the subject before they got completely sidetracked. "Anyway, I came out here to ask if I could help. I'm not a butcher, but I can peel and cut vegetables, and I know good berries and mushrooms to pick." "It's all right, Lady Stark. Please, I want to help," she cut in. "And you can call me Sansa." More than anything, she was sick of feeling useless. She had been useless in King's Landing, she had been useless on the run in the Vale, and she had felt useless and abandoned in Winterfell. She relied on Baelish to save her, then Theon, and now Brienne. Meera seemed to sense her powerlessness and eventually nodded. "All right, Sansa, why don't I teach you to skin and bone a rabbit?" Sansa beamed. "I'd like that, thank you." True to her word, Meera helped her learn the new skill. It wasn't until she fled from Ramsay that she even learned how to forage for edible forest food. Before then, everyone had done everything for her, keeping her helpless. Now she felt like she was doing things for herself, even without Baelish's tutelage. "I also wanted to thank you for taking care of my brother," she said, as she pelted her first rabbit. Meera stopped what she'd doing. "It's an honor to help him, but still, I wanted to thank you," Sansa persisted. "You've stayed by his side, even when all was lost. Without you and Josiane, he would have had nothing and no one." At mention of her brother's name, Meera's eyes misted. Inwardly, Sansa cursed herself for raising his ghost. But she knew what it was like to lose a brother. "We can never repay the debt we owe you, so I won't insult you by promising that we will," she continued. "Josiane knew," replied Meera. "The truth is, he probably knew before we even left Greywater Watch. Like Bran, he had the green sight. He saw the sack of Winterfell long before it happened. That's how we were able to escape. He knew the way to the Three-Eyed Raven, because they've always known each other." "I never knew such powers existed," said Sansa. All her life she had followed her mother's faith, the faith of the Seven. Only now, when she had lost everything, did the power of the old gods reveal itself before her. She could almost feel it resonating through the ground she walked on and the trees she sheltered beneath. "Sansa," said Meera, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Forgive me my forwardness, but I heard about your marriage to Ramsay Bolton and what he did to you." Sansa felt herself grow tense. "It's over now. I'm free of him." "Forgive me," Meera repeated. "But on the off chance that there are other consequences that perhaps you're keeping hidden, I just want you to know that I can brew the tea that will rid you of those consequences." Although her moonblood had come 3 or 4 times since her escape, gratitude washed over Sansa. "Thank you, Meera. But I have bled since then. The first time it happened after my escape, I cried for happiness. Before, when I was convinced he'd put a baby in me, I swore I would kill myself rather than birth his monster. It had been late, weeks late. She was checking every day and even every few hours, praying all the time that the cramps she normally dreaded would come and herald her time of the month. Shay once told her that the more you worry about it, the later it is, as if playing games with you. Then one night before reaching Castle Black, her mental anguish ended and the aches woke her before dawn. She really had broken down and wept with relief. Before Meera could reply, Benjen stepped out of the doorway of the tree. "The Raven wants to see you, niece." "Me?" she asked, puzzled. "You better go," said Meera. But before she left, the two girls wrapped their arms around each other in a tender embrace. Inside, Bran was positioned directly below the old man in the tree. Sansa craned her neck to look up at him, realizing he wasn't just in the tree. He was part of the tree. The thing had consumed him. She looked to Bran to see if he knew what was going on, but all he did was shuffle aside to make room for her. "Are we going to find out how to hatch dragon eggs?" she asked, recalling the previous evening's discussion with Jon. She had been no help to him. All she remembered about Daenerys Targaryen was Joffrey throwing a tantrum over the issue. "I don't know," he answered. "There's something he wants to show us." Sensing something else going on, she probed no further and settled down next to Bran. It was only her third time, and she still wasn't used to the feeling of being sucked back in time, rather like being squeezed through a tight tube and spat out the other end. First it was frightening, now it was uncomfortable. And when she opened her eyes again, she was greeted by the sight of battered corpses strewn along a riverbank. Gasping audibly, she jumped back and almost knocked Bran over. She would have fallen herself had he not been there. Apologizing, she gripped his hand and let her gaze rake over the scene of carnage before her. It wasn't the gore that shocked her, that was nothing she hadn't seen before, but having it sprung on her, out of the blue, proved a little much. "It's the trident," she said, noting a dead destrier blocking the river downstream. Bran had released her hand and was kneeling next to a dead man in black, enameled armor. She could see the three-headed dragon sigil on the caved-in breastplate, and the breath caught in her throat. The bloodied waters of the trident washed over Prince Rhaegar, carrying away the rubies embedded in his armor. A ribbon of gray silk trailed from his wrist. Cautiously, she stepped into the water and knelt to look at it properly. A white direwolf was embroidered in miniature alongside Lyanna's name. "Raise his helm," she said. "He might be alive." But Bran shook his head. "No, he's dead." The stars twinkled back at Rhaegar as he looked up through the skeletal roof beams of Summerhall. Underfoot. Debris crunched as he trod across the blackened floor. Back in its day, this burned-out shell of a pleasure palace had been a grand place. All marbled floors and sweeping, winding staircases, the banqueting hall was almost as big as the one at Harrenhal, but much more majestic. But its once ornate pillars and statues now stood broken and bent, melted in the heat of the fire that had consumed it. Summerhall was at once his favorite place and the saddest place in the world. Many asked him if, once he was king, he would order it to be rebuilt. But there was nothing he would change about Summerhall as it was now. The ruins possessed a beauty of their own. They were a whisper of the once grand past, a trace of human history that spoke of an age of beauty long lost. He had been born here, amidst the raging fires and choking on the thick palls of smoke, almost drowning in the tears of his mother and those grieving for the many dead that night. He knew the names of those who had died: Sir Duncan the Tall, Prince Duncan the Small, and his wife, Jenny of Old Stones. A woman he loved so much he set aside his claim to the throne to marry her. The little dwarf woman Jenny brought here had perished too. The one who made the prophesy that the prince that was promised would come from the line of Aerys and Rhaegar Targaryen. When Rhaegar came here, he played his harp for them in hope they could still hear it wherever they are. Here and now, however, Ser Barristan Selmy was leaning against a blackened pillar and watching him with that look on his face. That look which spoke of disapproval, but he couldn't say it to him because of his station. The prince hoped it would pass soon, but when it didn't, he sighed and turned to his old friend. "Ser Barristan, say it, please," he beseeched the knight. Ser Barristan righted his stand. "I don't know what you're talking about, your grace." "You know very well, so out with it," Rhaegar commanded. To show he wasn't letting up, he closed the gap between them so they stood shoulder to shoulder. "I just wish I knew why your grace keeps returning to this sad place," Ser Barristan replied. "And, I confess, every time you come here, I fear you will indulge in some folly, some sorcery to bring back that dragon of yours." "Then rest easy," he assured the knight. "I've left it with Lady Lyanna, where she's taking it. It will never be found." Speaking of which, when we're wed, I think I'll bring her here. As to that, Sarah Barristan cut in. Don't you think you're rushing things just a little? Rosier sighed heavily. I don't have forever. We're already running out of time, and I feel like I haven't even got started. The dragon is still stone. He tried to explain it 100 times, and always failed. Before Jon came along, no one else even believed him. But then, he knew Jon was his own conundrum. Barristan, do you know that boy Lyanna takes everywhere? He asked. Jon, Rhaegar nodded. I thought he was one of them, a Stark. He's identical to them. Don't you think? I assumed he was Eddard, Barristan laughed. He's about that age. It's more than that, he insisted. Lyanna told me she felt like she needed him, or that she knew him from somewhere. The thing is, and I did not tell her this, I felt the same. He stopped talking and turned to Barristan, gauging his reaction. Whether he thought he was mad or going off on a flight of fancy, Selmy could never hide his thoughts from him. However, the older man now just looked mystified. After a moment's clear struggle for something meaningful to say, he fell back on familiar ground. He's an excellent fighter, Your Grace. Dare I say it, the equal of Sir Arthur Dayne, no less. He carries a good sword, too, the Valyrian steel. I thought perhaps you might be looking for a position to give him. He also said he saw the others, Rosier said. What do you make of that? The old knight looked skeptical. And you believe him? Yes, he replied. Yes, I do. Which is why there's no time left to waste. We've got to get moving. He turned back to the ruins of Summerhall, certain in the knowledge that the dragon would only stir in there. Somewhere, a harsh headwind slowed the horse's progress as it struggled up the steep hill. Jon dug his spurs in again, but knew it was no good. He couldn't change the weather, and the animal was already suffering enough. After another hour, he dismounted and took the bridle in his hands, leading the way himself. The path he followed was blighted by loose rocks and treacherously uneven ground. He stumbled often and scuffed the toe of his boots. Then, to compound matters, the rain began to fall. Pulling his supplies off the horse's back, he wrapped his cloak around them to keep him warm. A local told him, even if he did find her, she would not speak unless he gave her offerings. He left Harrenhal over 2 weeks ago, unaware of just how long it would take. Worse, when he reached the top, there was no one there but him and his horse. Cold and soaked through, he gave the palfrey a dejected look. He sent us out here on fool's errand, hasn't he? The horse whickered in response, before pulling away to crop at the wet grass. Jon let him go and turned his attention to the stumps of the weirwood trees. He would set up camp in the middle of the circle and begin the long journey back on the morrow. The area was wide enough, but there was no hope of striking a flint in the persistent rain. But she found him before he could even think to go looking for her. The rain had got her, and she looked like a drowned woman. Limp hair hanging around her tiny frame. Red eyes dull against pale white skin. Without saying anything, she turned and walked away. Taking it as a cue to follow, Jon went after her, down the hillside and into an opening he had not seen in the dream. It was fortified with stones forming an arch, but it was warm inside and a fire smoked deep in the burrow. Jon let the sack fall from his shoulder and let it fall in the middle of the room he found himself in. Squinting through the poor light, he could see where the roots of the weirwoods had grown down through the roof of her burrow. They hung from the ceiling, or what passed for a ceiling, in twisting, snaking tendrils. I don't have much to offer, he said, locating her again, but it's better than nothing. You have nothing to offer but grief. She had her back to him, where she was pottering around with instruments he could not see. When she returned, she was empty-handed, but gestured to the fire. Sit. Hesitantly, Jon did so. The three-eyed raven brought me here, but I suppose you already knew that. Despite her earlier accusation that all he brought was grief, the old wood switch was now rummaging through his bag. She found the wine and hard cheese, homing in on it as if she'd sniffed it out a mile away. But Jon did not begrudge her. Not if she could tell him anything. His discomfiture grew as she maintained her silence. You said in the dream that the old gods have given you no peace since I came here, he recalled. I think you know who I am, where I've come from, eyeing the tree roots, he added. The raven gave you advance warning of my arrival. I take it. She drank from his wineskin and flopped down beside him. I gorged on grief at Summerhall. Now the old gods bring me yours. Don't talk to me about Brynden Rivers. Summerhall, again. That place comes up time and again. Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven showed it to me when I first got here. My aunt says the prince is obsessed with the place. Now you just happened to drop it into conversation that you were there. You mean the fire, don't you? Is that where the dragon awoke? The old woman turned her red eyes toward him. The prince that was promised will be born amidst salt and smoke, and wake dragons from stone. He will come from the line of Aerys and Raxley. My Jenny knew that and whispered to the dragonfly. Jon frowned. It was you? You made the prophecy? Her expression clouded as she rocked gently back and forth. Her red eyes reflected the fire, but she held her silence and reached for the wine again. She drank so deep, it ran down her chin. For all the grief it brought me, for all the grief it's yet to bring, she lamented, eyes dull with pain. I was there on the night of the fire, when they tried to hatch the egg. I saw my Jenny burn. Her pain was real. Jane could see it in her. The Targaryen obsession had all but destroyed the poor old crone, but he had to persist, or face being stuck in the past forever. Rhaegar was born that night, he reminded her, and the dragon egg they were trying to hatch awoke. I felt it myself. Waking from stone isn't the same as hatching from stone, is it? Did Rhaegar's birth wake that dragon? Is he the prince that was promised? A smile played at her thin lips as she met his gaze for the first time. He had struck a nerve and could almost feel the resonance himself. So, I must save him, Jon murmured, almost to himself, rather than the crone. But how can I do that without changing history? How did you get here, she asks. The method was etched in his very flesh. I was killed, he broke off himself, realizing a way out. If Rhaegar is dead, then bringing him to the future doesn't change anything. He's dead here, and he stays dead throughout the reigns of Robert and Joffrey. The ink stays dry, but the future is unwritten. That's it. That must be it. But how do I bring him back to my time if I'm stuck here? The old crone eyed him suspiciously. You were sent here for another reason, yet you didn't bring it with you. Jon sighed heavily. The dragon egg. I need to find a way to hatch that dragon between now and the trident. Fire and blood, Jon Snow. Fire and blood. He smiled as it all slotted into place. Summerhall, and you're like the Three-Eyed Raven, you can take me back there. That's why it keeps coming up. That's why it was shown to me. I need to go back there with the egg. Jon looked up at the weirwood roots hanging from the unseen roof. Is Brynden Rivers the Three-Eyed Raven? Of course, she replied. Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, bastard son of Aegon the Unworthy. I knew him well. It led Jon on to something else that had been bothering him. Something that bothered him more, now that he knew his reason for being here had nothing to do with his family. Why me? He asked. Why do I have to be the one to save Rhaegar and hatch dragon eggs? People die every day, yet I'm the one who gets sent back to do all this. The woman looked at him long and hard, calculating. You really don't know, do you? What? He asked, nonplussed. But the woman just laughed. She laughed so hard tears rolled down her cheeks. I could tell you everything, she said once she composed herself. But some things a man must learn for himself. Thanks again for reading. Reviews would be great if you have a minute. Jon sat with his back to the trunk of the weirwood, watching as Bran paced and Sansa nudged at the river water with the toe of her shoe. Knowing her luck, he thought she would be pitched in at any second. Mercifully, she soon gave up testing the water and came to join him beneath the boughs of the tree. So far, it seemed, they had found out little of interest on their travels. They informed him that Rhaegar definitely did die on the Trident, that their father was present at the sack of King's Landing, and that it was the eunuch, Varys, who opened the gates of the city to Tywin Lannister's forces. So much for serving the realm, Sansa had griped as Bran recounted all they had seen. Meanwhile, he had news of his own to tell, and a dragon egg to show them. I have to return to Hydar, just as soon as Rhaegar gets here. Then I need you, Bran, to meet at the fire of Summerhall with the Three-Eyed Raven. Look at this. He brought the box with the egg out of its sack and opened it in the clearing, where they could all see it. Sansa leaned forward, running her finger down its smooth, scaled edge. Bran stopped his pacing and came over for a closer look. The first fire didn't hatch the egg, he stated. So what will you do differently? Jon thought he had the answer. They used wildfire to basically set the thing on fire. They had 7 of them, all sitting in a pool of wildfire, of all things. No wonder the whole palace went up. Sansa grimaced, no doubt reliving her own memories of what wildfire could do. Jon knew she had been at the Battle of Blackwater, where the same substance was used to decimate an entire fleet of ships, and most of the crews along with it. As for Jon, he recalled Stannis and Davos telling him about it. It had been their ships at the heart of the conflagration that night, and Jon shivered just to imagine it. The whole river had been ablaze, and using that stuff in an enclosed place like Summerhall had been asking for trouble. What's needed, he added, is a proper blood sacrifice. Blood from the prince that was promised, I think. It's there in the Targaryen words, fire and blood, and Rhaegar was born that night, amidst salt and smoke and fire from the line of Aerys and Rosiella, just as the prophecy said. He was still cautious of setting too much stock in prophecy. It was vague and treacherous by nature, open to interpretation. But for want of anything else, it was all he had to go on. He fulfilled what criteria there was and was now merely hoping for the best. Then we'll do it, Bran replied. We'll meet you there. But what about you? How will you go back? The ghost agreed to help, Jon assured his brother. Did you know the Raven grew up here? He was the son of Aegon the Unworthy. He came to the wall with Maester Aemon. His lover was Shira Seastar, and they practiced magic together. Bran, I need him there when we go back to Summerhall. Bran's eyes widened in surprise, as though he hadn't considered what his mentor did before he became an all-seeing tree. It was Jon's hope that he might even know something about using magic to hatch dragon eggs. Either way, he knew he could not do it alone. If he knows, he will help, Bran replied. What about Sansa? Jon thought on it for a second. He hated leaving her out, but there was something else entirely that he needed from her. When he returned from Highheart, he learned that he had missed more than just his aunt's 15th name day. In a month's time, Lyanna is going to wed Rhaegar, he told them. I will still be at Highheart when it happens, so I need you, Sansa, to witness it for me. Disappointment clouded her expression, making him regretful. Hardly surprising, given her own woeful marital history. Hastily, he added, unless you don't wish to, you know, bad memories and all. I'll do whatever I can to help, she cut in. It's just that I would like to see the baby dragon if there's a way. Bran was quick to reassure her. There will be a way. Actually, we'll both be seeing a lot of the dragon. If Jon manages to hatch it, after a brief pause, he asked, what does Rhaegar think you're doing with it? Lyanna told him it's being taken to Winterfell, to incubate in the hot springs in hope of a natural hatching. Jon explained. It could even work, for all I know, but we can't afford to wait and take the risk. We need it hatched now, ready for attack. And does Rhaegar know his princely blood will need to be spilled in order for it to work? Asked Sansa. Not all of it, replied Jon defensively. So much as a shaving cut would suffice. But to be safe, I want a willing sacrifice, and a goodly amount. He'll agree, though, so don't worry about that. What I still don't understand is why it's me that needs to be the one to do this. I asked the ghost, but she just laughed me out of her hill. The other two were thoughtful for a long moment. It was Sansa who eventually answered. Because you're the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, it's you who will be commanding the troops that save the realm from the others and the Whites. This dragon isn't just taking back Winterfell. He's saving the realm. He wanted to tell her he was no such thing anymore. His brothers killed him. His watch had ended. But she was talking about him like he was one of the heroes from her favorite stories, the ones she stopped believing in a long time ago. He couldn't quite bring himself to say the words. Speaking of which, he eventually said, I need to be at the Trident. When I do, I need Melisandre back at Castle Black. It's imperative. Sansa nodded. Is that when you will come back? I don't know for sure, he replied doubtfully. Just on the off chance, I need her there, and you, preferably. As she agreed, their meeting drew to its natural conclusion. Before they slipped away, however, he caught Sansa in a hug and kissed her forehead. I'll see you both soon, he promised. He made his way back to Harrenhal under the warm spring sunshine without lingering to enjoy the weather. Straight up the southern tower to where Lyanna was waiting in the chambers allocated to her. In his absence, she had grown close to Oswald, Wyn's eldest daughter, and they were rarely apart. But now Rhaegar was due back any day, and secret preparations were being made for the secret wedding. However, when he did find her, she was sitting in a window embrasure overlooking the God's Eye, lost in her own musings. It took a full minute for her to realize she was no longer alone. Jon cleared his throat to get her attention. Lyanna? She gasped as she was jolted out of her reverie. You startled me. Still, she greeted him with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Forgive me, he said, settling down in the window seat beside her. Their view looked out over the vast lake, all the way to the Isle of Faces in the middle. On the north shore, two young lovers were entwined in each other's arms. "Aren't they sweet?" said Lyanna, smiling down at them. Jon managed to smile. The girl was a redhead, reminding him forcefully of Ep3, but when the girl turned her face towards the castle, he realized she looked more like Sansa. In fact, "Is that Caitlin Tully?" he gasped. Lyanna laughed. "Of course not. It's her sister, Lysa. Not sure who the boy is, though. Some sweetheart who set his cap at her, no doubt." "She's a long way from home," he observed. "Where is her father, her siblings?" "I asked after Cat, but she's still at River Run," she answered. "Lord Hoster and Ed Meera are here, though. They're just stopping for an overnight rest before moving on to the Fingers." Even though she did not know him here, he was relieved to hear Catelyn was safely at River Run. The memory of her was quite enough, without the flesh and blood reminder. Then, he remembered, she was due to marry Brandon in just a few short months. It was little wonder that she was trekking across the Riverlands with her family. Having seen enough of other people's happiness, Lyanna turned from the window and looked over at him. "Are you sure you're not going to be able to stay for my wedding?" "I'm sorry," he said, feeling guilty over it. He had missed her name day too, but bought her a bolt of cream silk to make up for it, to form part of her wedding gown. "When will you write to Lord Robert?" "This evening," she replied, her face darkening. "As soon as Rhaegar gets here. I'm dreading sending the letter, but it must be done. I don't even know why, seeing as he has a store of lovers secreted away." "I don't know about that," he replied, but otherwise kept his feelings to himself. In his time, Robert Baratheon's reputation went before him, but it was now that something was due to go horribly wrong. It was now that everything was poised to go to hell, and only he knew it. But he couldn't understand how, even if things were being done underhand, it was all pretty clear. While he and Lyanna lapsed into a natural silence, he turned back to Lysa and her man. It seemed they had begun to quarrel, with Lysa forcing the man to touch her belly, and him pulling violently away. "Oh dear," he thought, and soon lost interest. Rosier winced as the blade of the knife bit into his palm. Nevertheless, he closed his hand around the blade until he felt hot, sticky blood oozing through his bunched-up fingers. The droplets splashed against the shell of the egg, running down its sides and tracing the lines of the scaled edges in vivid red. He then opened his fist to let the blood run straight from the deep cut and onto the shell. The egg itself was sat in an earthenware bowl, ready to be packed in wool to keep his offering of blood sealed into its porous membrane. He was less than convinced that this blood sacrifice would work, but anything was worth a try. Meanwhile, Lyanna was standing by with a clean linen cloth, ready to bind his hand. Jon hovered close by, ready to set off immediately. "What now?" he asked, watching as Jon began binding the bloodied egg up. "There's hot springs deep below Winterfell," answered Jon. "I'm taking it back there, where no one will find it. We're hoping the heat of the hot springs will incubate the dragon until it hatches of its own accord." Still unconvinced, he nodded while the box was closed on the egg and the other man bore it away. Stepping into Jon's empty place, Lyanna bound his hand before the blood could spill on his clean tunic. "Is it stinging?" she asked. "Some," he replied, biting his lip as her bindings made the pain worse. But the sting soon subsided to a sharp throbbing. "Is Jon leaving for Winterfell already?" Lyanna nodded. "He will meet up with us again on the road to Dragonstone, I think. Although, I thought Eel and the children would continue to live there." "That was the first plan," he admitted. "But she is content to stay in King's Landing until the war against my father is over and I am king for the sake of the Dornish alliance." "She's a lot more generous than I would be in her situation," said Lyanna. "In fact, I think I would cut your—" "Oh, never mind." But Rhaegar was under no illusions. "It's not for my sake. Regardless of how Yakya and I really feel for each other, Aegon is soon to be next in line for the throne. Aegon's part Dornish and nothing will change that. So it's in their interest to make sure the alliance stands for his benefit. I know I've dishonored her and her brothers. I just hope you understand that I must do everything I can to make it up to them, including having Yakya at the Red Keep. Just until the succession is settled. Once it's all over, I will offer Yakya a good castle and a generous pension. But I doubt she wants to remain in Westeros. I hope you don't mind. We never loved each other, but Yakya is a good person who didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve me." A frown marred her brow, but she was still beautiful to him. "Of course, I understand. It's all so very complicated. But my love, have you considered what will happen if you lose? Inelia, your children, and even yourself could all be in great danger. He hadn't considered it because it wasn't going to happen. Every lord in the land wanted Aerys gone, and he was the promised change. He even had the Tyrells raising their banners at that very moment. If it hadn't been for Varys' snooping, the overthrow would have been planned during the tourney itself. As such, he offered his betrothed what assurances he could and kissed her cheek. "If I do this right, it might not even come to war," he said, cupping her face. "But before all that, let's forget everything and look forward to our wedding." Her cares melted away, and she managed a wan smile. Yes, we can. And if it does come to war, I'll take to the field myself, with my sword in my hands." That was more like it, he thought, and kissed her again. Jon didn't stop until he reached High Heart, over a week's hard ride for the hill and another day to scale the damn thing. Only once he was back with the ghost did he check his package. Rhaegar's blood offering had been packed it with linen and wool, keeping it safe from the elements. He unraveled it in front of her, slowly and carefully, while she sunk a bottle of wine he'd brought as a gift for her. The events of that night had driven the little dwarf woman half mad with grief, and he knew what he was asking by getting her to bring him back there. As such, he bought her a good Abergold, some fine Riverlands cheese, and a barrel of salted fish from Salt Pans. It was just enough to soften the emotional blow he had dealt her. "The sooner we get this started, the sooner it ends," he told her. Apparently, she agreed, cradling the dragon egg, pressing it close to his heart where it beat in tandem with the pulsing life within. He and the ghost reached for the roots of the ancient weirwoods. When he opened his eyes and stood up again, he found himself looking up at a magnificent pleasure palace surrounded by feasters and revelers. Music thrummed from within the halls, and voices all talked loudly over the melodious din. Before setting off for Summerhall, he looked around for Bran and found no sign of him. Muttering a curse, he stuck by the ghost, as she rocked and sobbed at the sight before her. Despondently, he realized she would be of no further help to him that night. Leave her be. Jon whirled round to where the three-eyed raven was making his way through the crowds. Although still startled, he breathed a sigh of relief and hugged the dragon egg close to his chest. Not only was Brynden Rivers a dab hand in mystifying people, but sneaking up on them too. To Jon's relief, Brandon was close by. "If we're to do this, we need to go now," Rivers advised. Jon nodded. "Then let's." It wasn't far to walk, and, invisible now, they slipped past the guards with ease. The doors were already open, along with plenty of windows. Jon realized that later in the evening, the breeze coming in would only help the already raging flames. In the marble banqueting halls he found himself in, the people were already assembled. He looked straight to the high table, where the king was seated beside his queen. Not far from them, a heavily pregnant Princess Rhaegar held the hand of her husband, Aerys. The difference in them was striking. They were young and beautiful, not yet ravaged by madness. After them, it was a central trestle table that caught his eye. The 7 dragon eggs were laid out in nests of kindling. A vivid green liquid oozed in the dishes in which the eggs rested. Wildfire, he realized, and felt his blood run cold. "The flames won't touch us," he said, looking to the three-eyed raven. "I mean, we can't die here in these visions, can we?" "If it's all the same to you, I'll wait outside," he replied, darkly. A tug of regret pulled at Jon's heart as he realized that this was his family. Whether or not he knew them scarce mattered. But he was a Targaryen bastard, and these were his people, about to be burned alive, with nothing they could do to stop it. Bran, however, had no such reservations and lingered by Jon's side. "Here they come," he said. "They're about to light the fire." Silence in the hall fell suddenly, causing Jon to shrink back against the far wall. All candles were extinguished, plunging the hall into darkness. Nerves prickled in his belly, his heart racing and his mouth running dry. Suddenly, he had second thoughts. But even as he tried to pull Bran away, a spark briefly lit the room, before the hiss of the wick could be heard. Every voice hushed as the tension swelled. Sansa sighed deeply as Lyanna and Rhaegar joined hands in the sept. Her aunt wore a gown of white and gold satin, trimmed with cloth of silver. Her thick chestnut hair was loose about her shoulders and her eyes full of adoration as she looked up at her new husband, and the prince, had Sansa been just a few years younger, she would have been weak at the knees from the moment he first stepped into the room. It was almost enough to make her start believing again, but then she remembered what happens next. Pushing those thoughts aside, she turned to the septon with his crystal crown and watched the light dance and sparkle as he prayed. Meanwhile, Sansa kept to the cloisters and watched her poor aunt muddle through the ceremony, which she clearly didn't understand. Like all Starks, her gods were the old gods. But when the moment came, she knew what to say. Father Smith, warrior, mother, maiden, crone, stranger, I am his and he is mine from this day, until the end of my days. She did not hesitate, and a tear slipped down her cheek as Prince Rhaegar recited his own vow to her. No regrets and no second thoughts. They were man and wife, a pact sealed as old Lord Wen handed Rhaegar the Targaryen wedding cloak, embossed with the three-headed dragon. Lyanna knelt as he wrapped it tenderly around her shoulders. A green flash tore through the darkness, and the excitement in people's voices turned swiftly to terror. On instinct alone, Jon shoved Bran out of the way as the first whoosh of flames sounded behind him. Many of those assembled to see the dragons hatch still thought it was part of the ceremony, and tried to reassure the others, not realizing how bad the situation was. To his relief, the more sensible were taking no chances, and already heading for the doors and windows. "Bran, are you all right?" he asked his brother. Bran didn't answer, but took Jon by the arm and led him deeper into the banqueting hall. The flames had taken hold already. The plaster in the ceiling was melting in the intense heat, and dripping down on fleeing guests. Already, Jon could see the king engulfed in flames. He tried to run, but was soon overcome and collapsed, folding in on himself as he shriveled in the heat. All Jon could hear now were screams and howls as living people were swiftly turned to charred meat in the deadly conflagration. "The princess!" Bran yelled over the noise, pointing to the high table. Rhaegar was screaming piercingly and shrill. But she did not move. She had fallen to the floor and was now curling up under her chair, screaming in pain. Without thinking, Jon shoved the unhatched dragon egg into Bran's hands and ran to Princess Rhaegar's aid. To do what little he could. "Your Grace!" he shouted as loud as he could, kicking the chair out of the way and overturning the high table. It fell with a deafening crash into a pit of fire below them. Rhaegar, it seemed, had already been pulled free of the fire and left his wife there to burn. Anger filled Jon as he looked around for the king, only to be shoved aside by a tall man, as yet untouched by the flames. Jon kept forgetting that no one could actually see him, but he still managed to clear the other man's path to the future queen. "It's Sir Duncan," Bran reminded him. "She will be all right now." Jon whipped around to where Sir Barristan Selmy was helping people escape the fire, along with the rest of his Kingsguard brothers. They were distorted by the heat, haze, and smoke as they retreated into the cool night air beyond. And soon, so very shockingly soon, the voices fell silent as everyone in that hall was either saved or burned alive. All that was left was the roar of the raging inferno, and Jon in the middle of it, holding the dragon egg once more. Even Bran had left him now, as he went to observe what was happening outside. Anger filled him. Anger like he had never known. "Fire and blood," he snapped. "You've gorged on both tonight, and still you sit there in silence." Giving up, he turned and ran for the entrance, just as the roof beams caved and fell, blocking his escape route. Drawing a deep breath, he backtracked and tried to stay calm. Still cradling the egg to his chest, he turned to face the heart of the fire. With his eyes closed, he stepped forwards and into the heat of the blaze. Even with it not affecting him, it was still so nerve-wracking. He thought he might throw up. He kept his eyes shut even as the floor caved in. The noise so loud it made the earth shake beneath his feet. He heard the cracking of stone, the falling of timbers, and the smashing of glass. As he suspected, the breeze was only making everything worse. "It's not so bad," he realized as his breathing calmed and the feel of the flames was pleasantly warm on his skin. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open as the flames leapt and danced all around him, wreathing him and balling in his hands. The egg was gone now. He couldn't remember dropping it, and he didn't stand a chance of finding it again. But even as he watched, he saw the flames in his hands taking shape. The flame formed into flesh in his very hands, roping into fiery muscle and sinew. Fire made flesh. The creature formed and sprouted up before his very eyes. "It's done," he thought with his heart, once more, leaping out of his chest. "It really is done." Sweat beaded Lyanna's brow as she rolled over, bringing the covers with her. Slowly, Rhaegar regained his breath and looked up at the ceiling. Still hot from the consummation. Beside him, Lyanna rested her weary head on his shoulder, eyelids fluttering closed with a faint smile on her lips. Her face was flushed from the urgency of their love-making, her thighs still wet with blood of her maidenhead. "Now we are husband and wife," she whispered softly, breath warm against his shoulder. Without saying anything, he flipped over so he was above her again. He leaned his head down and trailed kisses down her naked front, all the way down to her navel. There was no going back now. Naked and dazed, Jon sat cross-legged in the ashes and embers of Summerhall, caked in soot and dirt. Naked, he reminded himself. How did that happen? Naked he was, though, his clothes gone in the fire. Exhausted. The fire had also drained him of all energy, and he sat there listlessly, dimly aware of the creature curling around his forearm. It met his gaze with eyes as blue as sapphires. Not quite believing it had happened, he smiled at it, like a simpleton, until a gentle voice drew him from his daze. "Jon, you're awfully nude." Bran was already wrapping his cloak around Jon's shoulders, for which he was grateful. This was the second time he was naked in a public place. "Never mind that," he said, holding up the newborn for Bran to see. "Go and get Sansa. She wants to see the baby dragon." It twisted its long neck, the blue and silver scales glimmering dully in the morning light. Smoke curled from its nostrils, greeting the newcomer with a shrill shriek.